Yeah, I didn't think it'd go live. Yeah, we're live.
It's amazing what you can do when you focus on just one thing, like $4,000 when you refinance with Rams.
Maybe encourage them to dig deeper into things because.
All right, welcome everyone to Tough Talks. This is the subcategory of the Tough Love podcast. My guest tonight is author Gary Wayne.
Hi, Diane. Hi, Tricky. Good to see you guys.
The book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, which you can find on Amazon. You can also check him out on his webpage, thegenesis6conspiracy.com, where he has a very, very generous excerpt of his book up on there for your reading pleasure. It is chock full of incredible information concerning the Genesis 6 event, the Nephilim, or the Nephilim being born from the sons of God and the daughters of men. You can find his book here on Amazon. It is $9.99 in Kindle, and it is also $26.99 in paperback. Gary, great to have you back on the stream, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and looking forward to the conversation. And hopefully we'll connect a few more dots for people, and maybe
Hi, Gigabyte.
shade in
Good
a
to
little
see
bit of
ya.
context and help people dig. Well, maybe encourage them to dig deeper into things because. And I'm not here to knock churches. I don't like dividing Christians, but I think we all know that our current Christian churches, and I think it's about 99% of them, they don't teach prehistory and they don't teach prophecy. So
yeah, Tricky. What I'm going to do on the night you don't feel well, I'm going to play that Gosling's, the one they just done, because you've already seen it, mate. So I'll do it on the night that you're not here. Okay, that's why I asked.
They don't teach the Bible in the full context. So there's always these dangling questions and nagging things that people have. And I tend to be a contrarian that way. So I kind of like to talk about the things that the standard status quo establishment doesn't want to talk about, but show people that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's a little eye-opening, surprising at times. To say the least, but it provides context. Everything starts to make sense with what the Bible is saying if you just let it.
Absolutely. So we talked about it a little bit last time, but you were working on your follow-up book to the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. When can people be expecting that to hit the shelves?
Well, that's been a bit of a couple of speed bumps on it. The book is ready. And I had sort of done an initial deal with my original publisher.
Thanks, Tricky. You usually do, mate.
What happened was his last son, who was in the business, had left, and the owner's 80 years old. And so when he left, the deal sort of went kind of not up in smoke, but put everything sort of in question in terms of what to do next. And so the owners, who's still the owners, said, well, why don't you let me, because I want to wind the business down, I'll represent you and take it to some other publishers. So
Diane, it was really good fun mocking them. That's bad of me, but it was very much fun.
Publishers in the Christian so-called genre of publishers, and he's well connected in there. They basically said, we have nothing against the writing. We don't believe in Genesis 6. We don't believe in talking about prehistory or whatever. And they basically are saying, we don't care whether it's a good seller. We don't care whether it educates. And they declined all of it. And he was shocked. He's like, Christians should be aware of different points of view, but there's censorship that goes on in everything. So I expected that right out of the gate, but I thought, with a platform, with the previous book, with a larger publisher. So what he's done now is decided that Well, you know what? I'll wind the business down so I can manage it. And all I'm going to do is publish and produce for people I already know, the message that I want to have, get out there for Christians.
Mhm.
And so he's going to step back in and publish the book and distribute it. And we'll do the editing and the marketing and everything together. So we're going to stay where we are. And then we'll do for arrangement for, because of his age, maybe down the road, how do we shift that over to another company that I'll be talking to in a few weeks. So that's where we are in the book. So I think now that we go through the official startup, because this has been almost 3 months in that whole scenario where I presented the sample chapters, got the details sort of work. So now we have to go through the editing process and the marketing process, and that's going to take 2 to 3 months before. So I'm expecting probably a fall publishing date. They're going to put it right at the top of the priority list, even though they're always booked out at least a quarter in advance of books that they publish. So yeah, so we're at that point. We're starting back where I was 3 months ago. So,
man, well, we'll be praying for you. I know I will for sure.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things. It's this message is it needs to get out, and I think there's just so many people who are looking for this information, but there's a strong worldly influence status quo that's out there, and it doesn't matter what organization that you're talking about, Christian or otherwise, that is dedicated to their own agenda, not the scriptural agenda. So, but that's fine. We'll get it out. So I'm excited to get that back moving, and so it'll be marketed from the same website, and I'll get the generous excerpt up of all 84 chapters. And it's shorter than the first one.
Only by a very tiny bit.
Yeah. Well, there's 98 chapters in the first one, so let's say about 12 to 15%. So a little less.
That's a big old chunky book right there.
Well, and the thing is, I still didn't get all the information in there that's actually in the Bible. There's just so much that sort of talks into this. So I just would like to also throw out there, if I could, if there's anybody in the Orlando area of Florida, I am there not this weekend, but the following weekend for the Real Report conference, and we're going to do live shows, and they're selling tickets. So if you're interested, look up the Reveal Report.
Yeah, Tricky, I've seen him on channels that only have 5,000 subscribers. He's very humble, and he's probably the best on the topics he covers, like his Genesis 6 conspiracy. He's a go-to guy. He's really good. I agree.
And they've got the links to the show. They're selling tickets for the live audiences and things like that. I'll have a table set up. I'll be there when I'm not working on the shows to answer questions and just to meet people. And then in Atlanta, I'll be down there for the Sacred Word Mysteries of Revelation conference. I'll be speaking 2 days. And that is May 25 and 26, I believe it is, but it's that weekend. So the Saturday and the Sunday are the speaking dates. I speak on both Saturday for an hour and then on Sunday for an hour as well. So I'm going to cover off in the first presentation some of the terminology in Revelation. So I'm going to get things on there, like what wormwood is and what the scorpion beings are, and kind of things like that just will help people, the difference between tribulation and wrath as it's used in Revelation. And then I'm going to go into Revelation chronology. How do you put it in order, and how do you make sense of that order? And I'll explain that through taking it back to, what I think is one of the most controversial things that seemingly is out there these days. And eschatology is put everything around what Jesus said and not vice versa.
Yeah, put Christ right in the middle of it.
Yeah, but that seems to be controversial. Everybody wants to reimagine what Jesus said and define what he said by what the other prophets said or what they would like to have for it to mean. So I'll try and sort of get that on the table. But the key there is not to get people lost, but just here's a template and here's how it works.
Wonderful. Well, hey, got to figure that the opposition facing you in getting that second book out must mean that you are really barbing the enemy well. So as the good book says, count it all as joy when you're reviled and slandered, for great is your reward in heaven.
Yeah, there's and because of my approach on eschatology, there's also a significant amount of organizations out there that work with Christian conferences and end time prophecy. They will not have me speak. I think I spoke at one and they were just absolutely aghast, even though people were coming up and saying, awesome, for the first time it starts to make sense.
Yeah, goodness. Well, that's a great segue into what we're going to cover today, because it is also a bit of a contentious issue. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Book of Enoch. We're going to be getting into the Watchers. We're going to be getting into the end of the world. We're going to be talking a little bit about Mount Hermon. Yes, the same Mount Hermon from the Bible. So to kick things off, I recently just finished reading through the Book of Enoch, and I'm sure you're well aware of the late Michael Heiser and the work that he's done in studying that as a text man, much like yourself. And some of the questions that I've got here, I've sort of been pulling from other people that I have seen ask very similar questions with regards to this book. And the first one, I want to get your take on what's been your experience researching Enoch and its relation to the biblical narrative as a whole.
I like the Book of Enoch a lot, the first book, as opposed to Second Enoch, sometimes called The Secrets of Enoch, or Third Enoch, or the Book of Giants. The Book of Giants, we just don't have enough of it, but it seems relatively more consistent to the Bible and to First Enoch than 2 and 3. So, but the Book of Giants also connects into the Manichaean Book of Giants and works like that. So I have some sort of concerns on that. So what I like to do is I like to read things and put it in context with what the Bible says. So I measure everything outside the Bible from what it says within the Bible, and where it runs directionally consistent, I think it can give us some extra context. Where it runs in conflict, or there's nothing I can sort of use in the Bible to substantiate what that outside source is saying, I find, I'll note it as interesting. But if I can't match it up biblically, then I won't sort of use it for my positioning and for my explanations. So I have a fairly strong standard that sort of way. And I think that is very, very helpful, especially when you're getting into other religions and stuff like that. But the Book of Enoch is a very interesting book. So we don't have a full Hebrew manuscript, which is one of the big issues. We have some fragments, but we don't have all of it. In fact, we have very little of it. So we have surviving versions of Aramaic, we have surviving versions of Greek, and surviving versions of Ge'ez. I prefer the Ge'ez version translated into English. It's a little more complete than the Aramaic version. And we know there's a lot of consistency there. I'd say it probably runs about 99% sort of consistent with Scripture.
Okay.
And it provides extra detail, but not necessarily in a different direction than what the Bible is talking about. But we also have to remember, when it comes to the subjects talked about before the flood in the Book of Enoch, the Bible is rather stingy on that.
Yes. I feel like Moses expected people to just understand when he gave that very small synopsis in those first 4 verses of Genesis 6. I figured he was like, oh yeah, you guys know about this topic. I'm not going to explain it too much more. You know what we're talking about.
Well, the flip side of that, though, is there was like 70 scrolls in the Hagiographa of Judah and Israel that isn't part of the canon. So what I think might have happened down the road is books like the Book of Enoch may have been originally part of the Torah, part of the canon, and a larger sort of text of Genesis, but either their scrolls were lost due to wars, or the originals weren't found, and weren't sort of kept up. But we do know they must have had an original of the Book of Enoch at one time, because we have Hebrew parchments to it that substantiate it. We have terms in the Book of Enoch that line up perfectly with the Bible, like the sons of God, for example, the watchers. And a lot of people don't realize that the term watcher is actually in the Bible in Daniel 4 times. And it's the Hebrew word ayir, which is a very important word to understand as it's used for other applications in the Old Testament, but that's a different rabbit hole. So, and you also have what I find very interesting is you have a specific kind of angel that's described in the book of Enoch that most people say, what the heck are they talking about? And that's the Ophanim.
Yes. Oh, perfect segue. I was just going to ask you about the Ophanim. Take her away.
Yeah. So we should know who the Ophanim are. But because things aren't taught in churches on prehistory or even more recent history, still ancient, and or what's going to happen in the end time, you don't get this kind of information. So Ophanim is a group of angels that are part of the Watchers. So in the book of Enoch, you have the archangels, you have the seraphim, the cherubim, and the Ophanim, and these are all watchers who are awake all the time, right? They never sleep. They guard, take care of, serve before God. And that's one of the meanings of watchers, is to be awake, to watch. And it's rooted in a Hebrew word with more UWR as it's transliterated into English. And that means to stay awake and not to sleep. So we have the term watcher that connects. And we also have this Ophanim term that's describing a group of angels that are actually in the Bible. But you won't see the word Ophanim as it's translated in English.
Okay.
So in the book of Ezekiel, in chapters 1 and chapters 3 and chapters 10, you have the vision that Ezekiel receives of the chariot of God. And you have these cherubim, and in the book of Psalms, it's the cherubim who pulls this vision of the chariot of God. And then you have, and cherubs have 4 faces, right? And
G'day, boss. Good to see you, mate.
Get into the details of the chariot part, you get these wheels, the wheels within wheels. So when it's talking about the wheels within wheels, that's as an inanimate object, it goes back to the Hebrew word Gilgal, which means wheel, just as in Gilgal Raphaim, the wheel of the giants that's at the foot of Mount Hermon. So just to sort of connect into my obsession where the word is used. And you also have these angels that are described within the wheels. And they're cherubim-like, but they're not the same, because one of the 4 faces they have is the face of a cherubim.
Far out.
Yeah. Now, when it's talking about the wheel angels and referring to these beings, that's the Hebrew word ophan. You put on the I am male plural, as in seraphim, cherubim, Nephilim, Rephaim. You arrive at Ophanim. And so these are the wheel angels, and they have all of these eyes, right?
Yes. So I had heard a long time ago, I forget what, not documentary, but commentary I was reading on it, describing the wheel and the wheel that Ezekiel was seeing. And some people, I want to say they got this probably contrived from the History Channel and them talking about ancient aliens, but they were trying to ascribe a certain gyro or a gyroscope to the actual wheel within a wheel. But then you think, all right, well, this thing is covered in eyes. It seems to have an organic component.
Yeah, it's kind of got both that's going on. And understand it's an interdimensional thing. Whatever it is, it's partly angelic, it's partly perhaps technology, it may be partly spirit, partly able to take form. We don't know. It's very, very sort of advanced technology. And what's also interesting, as you understand who the Ophanim are, is that we get this, a lot of people say we have, when you get into the book of Revelation, you get the throne room again. You have these 4 living beasts. These are the cherubim. Well, problem is the cherubim have 2 wings. The four living beasts have 6 wings, and the Ophanim aren't described with any wings. But the seraphim have 6 wings.
Interesting.
And you have 4 faces on the living beast. So do the cherubim, and so do the Ophanim. But these seem to be more of a cherubim face. So now you have like a cherubim face with seraphim wings, and it's full of eyes. So now you have the Ophanim eyes in the mix, and it's almost like this is either sort of a mosaic of those watchers put together, or it is just sort of an allegory that they're all there. They're just describing them as one. But I think it's like something changes as we move forward, that either these beasts, these angels, are not going to hold the same position as they had before, and they're sort of amalgamated into one now, or it is just more metaphorical, just as a description to describe all the different types of angels. But the archangels aren't mixed in with them. They're like the 7 angels there, like they are separate. So for some reason, there's something going on going forward in the end time and into the millennium and thereafter that changes about that throne room setup, just as the time you see the 24 elders show up, for example.
Sure, in the Casting Crowns event. So that makes me wonder a bit about the concept of locality. When you're existing outside the bounds of time and space, when you have, they call it Planck's constant, when you divide an atom to the smallest absolute particle, eventually it becomes a part of everything all at once. It seems like for beings that could be existing on that plane, that could very well be something within their realm of expertise. But what you mentioned on the Ophanim there makes me wonder, have you ever seen the biblically accurate Christmas tree topper?
No.
All right, so you're gonna get a kick out of this one. This is the biblically accurate Christmas tree angel topper, and here it comes at you there.
Wow, how is that biblically accurate? I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, but it seems to be a First Nations
attempt at it. Yeah, so I'm seeing notes of the Ophanim inside, the rotating wheels there. But like you just said, they were never described with the wings, so it seems like they've got the seraphim mixed in there as well. One of my indolent companions sent that to me around Christmas time. So happy holidays in retrospect to them.
Yeah.
So
the topper on the
Hey, Tree, it's not too much information. We pray for you, buddy.
stomach tree, commonly known as the cedar of Mount Hermon.
Yeah, adds a whole different spin on the notion of Advent. So on the topic of the watchers themselves, I was looking through, because we have inside the Bible, like you said, we hear of the seraphim described, we hear the cherubim, and then we also have the beasts, and then we have inside Daniel's visions the other beasts, like we have the one with the multiple horns, the one horn that's grievously wounded and is blaspheming God. When I was going through I believe it was in chapter 17 or 19 of Enoch, when it was describing the different angels and different watchers, it had, of course, the cherubim listed, the seraphim, the Ophanim, and then it said angels of power and angels of principalities. Would those be within the same ranks, or are those separate?
Separate ranks. So you have a hierarchy to both loyal and rebellious angels, and so principalities and powers, as they're translated into English, the English translation actually confuses them at times, and so you've got Greek words that are like arche, which would be for like principalities. They might be called rulers in other passages, but that, again, it all goes back to the word arche. They are lower level, so you have the watchers at the top, and then you have another layer of intermediary angels, and then I think you have messenger, soldier angels on the third level. I put this together in the new book, and it's a little bit different than the standard version of the church. because they're not dealing with the original language, and it gets things up. So you get like powers that will be translated from exousia and dunamis. They're like two different kinds of angels. So I separate those out and match them up. And so you're going to get pillars that are going to go downstream. So you're going to have like the seraphim. They're going to have a hierarchy below them. You've got the archangels who have a hierarchy behind them, and you could argue the cherubim have a hierarchy and the Ophanim have one, or they're part of the same one.
Okay.
And I tend to think about them as more as one, but you could think of them as having separate ones. So I put that together, and it's in the new book, and I think it starts to make some sense out of some of the terms that are used in the New Testament. We don't get these lower level terms other than angel that's used in the Old Testament. So like the powers, you don't really get that translation coming out of the Old Testament. So you have to put both of them together to arrive at that hierarchy.
Gotcha. Now, I believe in our last chat, did you say that there's around 10 different classes of angels?
Yeah, I would, let's see, I would say there are 4.
Mario just picked you up.
I would put them at 9 or 10, depending on how you want to classify one of the groups. So, like, you get one type of angel that seems to be like the mighty ones, or the dunamis, but it's the Icaros, and that's a specific Greek word for those mighty angels in the Book of Revelation, versus where you would have mighty angels that are in the rest of the New Testament.
Okay, gotcha. So then that leads into my next question here. So we have right out the gate, within the first 6 chapters of the Book of Enoch, we have this scene that plays out with the angels atop Mount Hermon, spearheaded by Samyaza. Can you go into that there, and what the significance of it being atop Mount Hermon means for the Bible narrative?
Yeah, just for the audience, give a little bit more detail as to what's going on in that scene.
Sure. So for those who are unfamiliar with the Book of Enoch, we have this confederacy of angels. We have leaders over thousands and over 10,000s that are atop Mount Hermon, and they're being brought there by Samyaza, who is sort of their overseer. 200 angels contrive to make a pact that they are going to commit this very grievous sin with the daughters of men, and in so doing are ensuring themselves a one-way ticket straight into the abyss.
Sure. And this is significant because it has an effect both before and after the flood. And Mount Hermon is important both before and after the flood. So the 200 angels, we don't get that biblically. It doesn't really matter whether there is 200, 300, or less. What we do know is biblically the sons of God, which are referenced as angels in the Book of Enoch, just as Job 38 recognizes the sons of God as angels, like the morning star orders of angels that are in the Old Testament. So, and other references, you might look at Job 1:6 or 2:1, and you have stars and angels and host of heaven, sons of God, and angels used interchangeably and together in pairs at times throughout the Bible, connecting them all as that type of being. So when we see the sons of God in Genesis 6, this is likely from the watchers that are described in Daniel 4. So everything sort of starts to tie together, and you have this oath that is being taken, and it's Haram anathema, as it's understood. It's the accursed oath of Mount Hermon to carry it out to the end, no matter the consequences. So it's an accursed oath, and it comes from the Hebrew word haran, A-R-A-M and E-M. There's several different variations or words that are all sort of interlinked. So we can take the words there and we match them up biblically in the Old Testament. I do that in the new book for people. So sort of look forward to that comparative as well. And this is the oath-based society that they are establishing before the flood.
Okay.
Now, and if giants are recreated as opposed to surviving after the flood, but I guess if they survive, you're just carrying over the oath, or there's another oath that might be sworn on Mount Hermon with the Baalim, as we would understand that biblically, who are the ones accredited in the Ugaritic text for creating the Rephaim.
TPMS, this is the Oracle TPMS I told you I was going to give you a little bit of info about. A couple of bits of gear, right?
Right.
Okay, so
as part of the second version, they would have sworn a similar oath of
Tricky, has a CBD oil got must have cannabinoids in it? You get stoned on the CBD oil?
Aram anathema, and the oath-based world is the world we swim in today. Just as we're told not to swear oaths because you're going to be held accountable for that.
yeah, it's takes it right back to Judges with Jephthah's tragic vow, and essentially taking an allowance that he really didn't have to do because God was already going to give him victory.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. I want to touch on one thing and then come right back to this. One of the big questions that's been arising a lot from our last talk together was, okay, well, if the Nephilim were all wiped out in the flood, then how do we have them back on the scene again? And one of the things that I mentioned was that just because they were wiped out or all drowned in the flood, it does not preclude another potential sinning of angels, because we do know that the fall that takes place wasn't the sin that Peter and Jude are describing in them disrobing of their outer bodies to copulate with human females.
Yeah, and I kind of cover this off in my book that there's different theories as to how they survived the flood. And I lean heavily towards second incursion because it just makes more sense. And that's the distinction between the Rephaim and the Nephilim. And probably in a lot of ways that we talked about in the last show. But I recognize that they could have survived the flood somehow. So there's two other kind of buckets that I sort of put in there. And one of them is somehow on another ark. And this is under the bucket of help from the fallen angels.
Well, and with 600 flood myths over the world, like you figure that, like, are all these people making this up?
Yeah, and a lot of them are giant survival stories. So, like the classic is the epic of Gilgamesh that people like to beat Christians over their heads with and saying that's the counterfeit story that shows up in the book of Genesis, because if we have a longer, older standing manuscript or stone version of the epic of Gilgamesh that dates back to minimum 2150 BC from the stones, but it's more Sumerian. But what I tell Christians is don't fall into those traps that the polytheists and the seculars who answer to the polytheists will lay out there. Of course, it's an older surviving manuscript because the Torah doesn't come down to Moses until about 1400 BC, 1400 to 1450. So it has to be older. It doesn't mean it, right? So, but within that, you have giant creation after the flood with Gilgamesh, because he is the son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and the mother goddess, fertility goddess, queen of heaven, Nin or Nin-sun, as some of the translations are, just as Enkidu is also the offspring from the same mother goddess. That's a second creation. And so you also have a survival story there with the ark, because not only are Gilgamesh and Enkidu 2/3 God and 1/3 human, and Gilgamesh is described as 11 cubits tall, and as a king of Uruk, he'd be 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide at 4 cubits wide. So this was a giant. I mean, there's just he's not
big
just
old
tall,
boy right there.
He's not just a little stronger. It's a monster.
Yeah.
Even bigger than King Og would have been based on King Og's bed size. So you have Upnapishtim and all of his family, who are archetypical Nephilim picked by fallen angels, with an ark supplied by fallen angels to survive the flood. And he's 2/3 God and 1/3 human as is the rest of his family. So you've got both in that version as to how they might show up. Deucalion and Pyrrha was one other example in Greek mythology that are talked about as the Greek Noah. Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. So he's a giant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another giant survival story. So, but under the bucket of fallen angels helping, they could take them in the earth, probably in another dimension, into Sheol, if they wanted to protect them. They could take them off the earth if they wanted to do that.
Mhm.
Somehow, with the help of fallen angels, just as the fallen angels provided the ark for Upnapishtim and Deucalion. So, and you also have another bucket that people like to use, and this is my least favorite of the groups, is the somehow on the ark theory. So you have polytheists that say Ham was a giant. You have polytheists that will say all the sons and Noah were giants and all of the wives were giants. Some will say that either Tubal-Cain, as in the last Noah movie, or Og, as in Greek mysticism, there were a stowaway on the ark. Some people will say in the Christian community that the wives carried the giant DNA.
I've heard that.
And that's how they show up through the Canaanites, but just the Canaanites apparently, which kind of makes, anyways, I'm not real, I don't rule them out because we're not told specifically how, and a lot of people might ask me, well, how could they survive the flood if God destroyed all things? Well, you have to look at the detail. If you wanted to make this argument that they survived, you could look at both in Genesis 6 and in Genesis 7, I think it's in 7:4, I think it's 6:7, where God just said he was going to destroy everything he created.
Mm-hmm.
He did not create the giants. And so if you wanted to look at a legal term, and that he's still permitting free choice of the fallen angels who aren't going to go to the abyss, you could make a case that there's a survival story, but you're starting to fall in on a little bit of legalism, and I know that connection is there, but for me, if we understand that the sons of God went to women and created the Nephilim that's described in Genesis 6:4, and then again, we can understand that quite easily as again before the flood and again after the flood. And there may have been just different fallen angels that did it. And as some people have stated it, the second one was, well, one was for passion and one was for spite.
Yeah. It's like, we're already down, might as well just go ahead and light this candle.
I think it was spite both times, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, and to what we were just saying there, especially inside Genesis 7:20-24, where if we're going to be, textualists and we're going to take the word at its face value, it says that every living thing on the face of the ground was what died. Doesn't say as for anything atop the surface of the water. So I think that's also a very plausible idea, because God knows they're not just going to stand on the very tippy top of a mountain if the water's covering 15 feet. I mean, you have to be some tall boys and then wait out almost a full year for that water to abate.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah. So, but either way, I mean, what we do know is, and this is very difficult for people who are part of the establishment dogma, is there are giants before the flood, there are giants after the flood.
Yeah.
And you can wish them away. You can change and bend scripture like a pretzel, but you can't take the word away that says there were giants before the flood, there were giants after the flood.
Yep. Absolutely. So jumping off that there, we have this confederacy of angels that they have all contrived to commit this sin. I love what Samyaza says there as they're about to swear these oaths. And tell me if I've got this right here. So this is after they've already fallen from heaven, and they know that they're going to be damned creatures for the sin of going with Satan and forsaking God and his truth and his grace. So my take on this here and what Samyaza says, he says, It says, and Samyaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath and bind one another with curses, so not to alter this plan, but to carry out this plan effectively. My logic behind that there is that they're all looking at each other going, all right, we're already screwed here. However, if we can mess up God's plan in having an actual Messiah be born from a pure lineage of man and then God's seed himself, then we can totally mess up his entire redemption arc here in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and I would say a little grander than that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the Messiah issue is a secondary plan B type of thing, if you want to look at that, or plan C, wherever you want to put it in on the scheme of things. They're looking to create the demigods to lead people away from God, to have them have no knowledge about God, and to swear allegiance and oaths and worship the pantheon of fallen angels. And that the demigods are there not only to lead humankind away, but to destroy them, not just physically, but also spiritually, so that they will not attain their destiny, that they will turn them into either so evil or destroy them from the faces of the earth. There are no descendants, right? That it's just going to be the offspring of the demigods that are going to be in this world. And so that's what they're trying to do. And the angels do not want the Messiah to be born to somehow, and they don't know what the answer is to this, but to somehow cause it that humankind will be raised up to be like angels in the future time, and to be probably raised higher by the utter sort of disgust that these angels had for humanity and the crimes that they committed against humanity, and that we were to right from the beginning to judge those rebellious angels for the crimes against humanity in the future time. So they wanted to make sure we were wiped from the face of the earth. We were wiped from the book of life, all the names blotted out, so that we would be remembered no more. Sounds very familiar when you start getting into the Israel scenario at the time of the conquest. It's the same plan, to be a inferior, not worthy being, and to justify the angelic rebellion, so that they would be able to have their own realm on their own. They knew they couldn't win. Mm-hmm. They always knew that. What they didn't know, as Corinthians talked about, is they didn't understand a resurrection. Yes. It was hidden from them. And otherwise, as it says, the princes of this world, or the arches of this world, would not have ensured Jesus was crucified.
Sure. It's almost as if they looked at each other and said, all right, well, like after the Messiah was born, and you actually I'll touch on that here in a second too, but after the Messiah is finally born, and then the plot to have him snuffed out at birth is thwarted, because they're off in Egypt land, and then he finally is actually hung on that cross and he dies for his sin. It really seems to me that, like you were saying, with the more grand over-the-top scheme, is they're going, all right, well, we failed in stopping the Messiah to be born. We failed in stopping him from dying for the sins of all mankind. Let's hit God where it hurts, and let's see how many of his children we can cause to completely corrupt and fall away as we can, and see how many we can take with us.
Yeah. And I think that because nothing is new under the sun, that within that Nephilim culture before the flood, there was an Antichrist type figure that we don't know a name to, just as there will be an Antichrist figure in the end time, and just as all the leaders of the beast kings are trying to become an Antichrist figure, except that Michael prevents that from happening. He doesn't prevent the beast empires from rising. He prevents Antichrist from taking power until the ordained time. And so, I think that we need to understand the days of Noah so we can better understand what that end time is going to be like from that sort of perspective. And we also get an incident in the book of Giants of Enoch, where there's these dreams that they're going to go to, that the giants are having, and they go to Enoch to say, is there anything that we can do to prevent this catastrophe from coming? And Gilgamesh in the Book of Giants. So the Gilgamesh after the flood then would be named after the giant before the flood, which is not unusual, just as Hercules would have had a counterpart before the flood.
Sure.
Because Zeus is an offspring god after the flood who creates Hercules by marrying Alchemy, Aclyme, I think is the spelling of it. Alchemy. I'm butchering it a little bit, but I'm close. Just
You're doing better than I would.
Bit of a dark spot on that, but anyways, he's a post-diluvian giant. So Gilgamesh in the Book of Giants, he's so upset that he is going to try and storm heaven. He's like an antichrist, I figure, and he's going to make war with the sons of God. He's going to make war with the angels, and that's antichrist-like pedigree, if you want to put it that way, because in Daniel 10, Antichrist will storm heaven, which is, I think, happens at the same time as the war in Revelation 12 at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And they're going to try and take over heaven, just as Satan tried to do in Isaiah 14, and do it again in the end time. But Antichrist actually pulls down some of the starry host in Daniel 10 and tramples on them.
Wow. So now, I guess when Daniel's referring to him pulling them down, is he referring to a secondary fall, or is he referring to the Antichrist, like literally besting them?
Well, if you go to Revelation 12, you understand that Michael pushes, and his armies, they push all of the fallen angels down to the earth, right, for the last 3.5 years. But it would seem that Antichrist, who is kind of leading that as the false Messiah to overthrow the dark Lord of the universe, as they like to call the God of the Bible, he's able to wrestle some of these angels as prisoners down to the earth and does horrible things to them in the end time, to show how powerful that they actually are, to put out propaganda. We didn't really lose this war.
Yeah.
So they have to come up with some sort of story on that.
It's all so counterfeit. I love how you describe inside Genesis 6 Conspiracy, your book there, about how Satan and his minions are more or less trying to duplicate every single great event that God has done.
Yeah.
If for nothing other than to cause just even more mass falling away. And it's why we even have inside the Bible where it says, were it not for the fact that those days were cut short, not even the elect would have been able to stand up under it.
Yeah, everything would have been destroyed. No flesh would survive if the days weren't cut short. And even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, which is why he is going to save the elect from that time of trial. And that's the time of the mark that marks the ones who will be going under the wrath of God. We'll go through tribulation, but we won't go through the wrath. The wrath happens in the last year of the last 7 years. But we'll be saved that where you have to make that choice, because the deception will be that strong. It will deceive some of the elect. And you have to understand, he's going to do a counterfeit resurrection. He's going to have a counterfeit Armageddon.
My gosh. So
everything attributed to Jesus will be counterfeited.
I recently watched one of the Fall Brothers documentaries, and they were talking about the final great deception.
Yeah.
And actually, they referenced you. It looks like you did some work on with them on that documentary.
I actually didn't do any work with them, but I worked with them on podcasts and stuff like that. And
oh,
really
okay.
liked my stuff. So,
well,
their difficulty is they work for a company that takes a different eschatological position on some things than I do. So,
gotcha. So, well, I mean, and I guess, to that end, they mentioned a lot of the same things that we're touching on here, the counterfeit nature of things. So, sort of piggybacking off of that, I noticed one of the chapters inside the Book of Enoch specifically talked about those 7 sacred sciences that you have these 7 angels that are taking upon themselves to start imparting to men. Now, in their doing that, is that to say that there wasn't an understanding of, say, like mathematics, or an understanding of like trigonometry or geometry already on Earth, or was this them sort of taking it and corrupting it?
Yeah, so I would say that Enoch, as what the Gnostics believe, and particularly through the records of ancient Masonry, who take their organization back to Cain and Enoch and Lamech of the
Tricky, especially now King Charles has been coronated. Apparently, a lot of things were set into effect, like the Great Reset, and the World Health Organization got some sort of order from Charles as well. I don't remember what it was, though.
Cain line and Tubal
In the spare room.
Jubal and Nama as great patriarchs.
3 days old, Diane.
Say that they did have knowledge that was handed down from Adam, from God, because he had to run this massive, almost continent-like, from the Euphrates to the Nile River, where there's all of these orchards, all of these herds of animals, domesticated animals, crops, all sorts of crops. As you take that language back to the Hebrew, you understand this has been sort of whitewashed as to the size of. He would have had to been taught by God all sorts of things, and because it's absolutely massive. And then God actually provided him one helper.
Here you go, kid, figure it out. Just you two.
Yeah, I've doubled your capacity. So that knowledge was passed down to Cain, and Cain passes that knowledge on to Enoch, his son. There's two Enochs, if people weren't aware of that. One son of Cain and one son of Jared. And the polytheists, they raise son of Cain, Enoch, to almost godlike status, as he's understood in 3rd Enoch, as in being raised to an angelic type of being because of the knowledge. So he puts this knowledge into 7 disciplines that we know as the 7 sacred sciences or the 7 liberal arts today. And then this knowledge is what merges with the angelic technology and knowledge that suddenly takes this whole knowledge base to a level that we haven't reached yet today. But I think what we're seeing is angelic technology once more being provided to get us back up to that level of knowledge, so it can be like the days of Noah, understanding Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. Both had giants, both had fallen angels.
That's sort of right in line with how L.A. Marzulli will talk about these megalithic structures. You know, he's like, this is fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture, 100% through. You know, things that we can't even recreate now. You get stonemasons that look at these structures where you can't even fit a piece of paper between the stones, and they're going, I don't know, man.
Yeah, and they use the 7 sciences not only to lead people away from God, but also to degrade God, as in slander him, and not give God credit for anything, but to honor their pantheon of gods, right? So all of these megaliths, all of these cities, just as all the sciences and education today is swimming in polytheist imagery, whether it's the gods of Greece or whatever, the architecture, it's all polytheist, and it's honoring the pantheon of gods. And so they would honor the gods of the zodiac, and they would have zodiacal, astronomical, and astrological alignments and things encoded into it. It would have sacred geometry. It would have ratios that only could come from the fallen angels or a very advanced society, and it was designed to be done at a level we can't do today, and at a time where they shouldn't have been able to even build huts based on what the secular people would tell us.
Wow. Well, you bring up, the zodiac and the signs of the stars. I mean, and what we understand today as the zodiac is a total corruption of the Jewish Mazzaroth, the original zodiac that told the entire story of redemption through like the 3 deacon constellations and then their 3 stars, like in such minute detail.
Yeah, astrology is a corruption of astronomy, and it's done to, again, be used to show people that all things are controlled by the pantheon of gods. And in that is the worship and the ritual thereof.
Wow. So here's another question then for you. So I guess on the topic of corruption, and what the angels that fell, the watchers, ended up engaging in, because we have a list of things inside Leviticus 18 where it talks about the people that lived in Canaan doing all these abominations, and for which the Lamb vomited them out. One of the acts they engaged in there, in addition to incest with one's relatives, was bestiality. Now, just reading through chapter 17 and 19 of Enoch, it mentions inside there this shape-shifting aspect that the watchers had. And it made me wonder, can the watchers take on both animal form and or could they take on a feminine form if they wanted to?
Yes, they could take any form that they wanted.
Wow.
It's that powerful. So you have, when you have the duality of polytheism and the mother goddess, they're counterfeiting the Holy Spirit. And so, right? So, and most people don't, but we get these mother goddesses as the Queen of Heaven or Astarte and other names in the Bible that are referencing these female gods to counterfeit, the Holy Spirit in terms of the polytheist religion. And so they can also take other forms. And so let me just present another example other than the male and sort of the female. This isn't biblical, but it gives you an understanding from how the polytheists understand it. So gods like Zeus were known to take the form of a wolf, right? And AKA the mythology of the werewolves, creations of another type of Nephilim, right? Okay, so if we understand that, and we understand that in First Nations they have all sorts of gods that take animal forms and things like that, right? And so they can take forms any way they want. And people say, well, angels are spirit beings; they can't take a physical form, and so therefore they can't have sex, right? And then they link in, Matthew, the book of Matthew, and say there's no sex in heaven, except they leave out the Luke aspect of it, which gives you the whole explanation, because the only way these cases can be made is if you leave out the inconvenient passages. So, sorry to be tongue-in-cheek on that, but we do get examples of angels in the Bible taking human form. So when the pre-existent Jesus decides to go visit Abraham, for example, he is going to take a human form. And he is going to eat and drink and touch and interact.
Good to see ya.
He creates what you call an oikotarian. And an oikotarian is a word that comes up in Jude 1:6 out of Greek for the habitation that those fallen angels left in heaven. So you have an oikotarian that's required for heaven, an oikotarian that's required for the physical world. So in 2 Corinthians 5:2, you get into a word that says the house of heaven, as that's talking about this sort of concept, and that's a dwelling place in heaven, a house in heaven. So oikotarian means a dwelling place for the spirit. So the implication is you need a dwelling place for the spirit, and a dwelling place for the spirit is the soul and the body in the physical world, and the spirit needs that, and it merges with the soul, and it creates that oikotarian. So Jesus being, or the word before he became flesh, is all powerful, right? Alpha, Omega, as the word of God. And so can create that. But angels don't have the same power as the word of God. But he's accompanied by 2 angels. And these angels aren't understood as angels at first. They look like men.
Yes.
They don't look like, they don't have wings. They don't have this spiritual opalescent type of presence. They are physical bodies. Now, some people say, "Wow, angel." It goes back to the Hebrew word malek, and it can mean a messenger. Well, Hebrew words have several different meanings. You have to apply the right meaning for the application.
Yeah, it's like the 20 words used for the word tree. It's like, well, this is a tree in bud, a tree in fruit, it's a tree that's dying, a tree in the winter, a tree in the fall.
Yeah, so yes, angels are messengers. that's part of their description as well. And sometimes that word messenger and Malach is used for humans, but clearly it's an ambassador sending a messenger in that narrative. So again, don't misapply. It's got to fit within the sentence, the narrative. And in this narrative, they come with God. So angels typically aren't named. Humans would be named. These are not named. Again, then these are the ones that go on to Sodom.
Yes, yes. The ones that take Lot by the hand and have to escort him out of the city.
Yes, that the people of Lot want to have sex with.
Oh gosh.
Right? But is that they want to have sex with males, or do they want to have those angels have sex with their daughters? It's not clear in the narrative. It's just assumed, and it could be a bit, but there's an assumption it's male upon male. Or they clearly also understood perhaps that they could change their form into female if they wanted to, and that they could have sex to make other giants. Sodom,
amen, Tricky. Amen, brother.
Is a epicenter of giants, and is likely, and I have a document on this for people for second incursion, is likely the location for the creation of post-Diluvian giants, as opposed to Gomorrah, which the Gnostics say was the location for antediluvian, and they also agree with Sodom as being the location for the second incursion. And so they were totally familiar with this doctrine, and they were looking to add more giants in there because the post-Diluvian giants have a fertility issue.
So then, could that there be how we end up with? At least I think it could be, but could that be how we then end up with Nephilim spawning from Ham's line, specifically from Canaan? Because like you mentioned, them being able to take on a feminine form. First, we had the Watchers came down in male form with the daughters of men. I suppose the reverse could be done, because we have from Canaan's line, we have like 5 major Nephilim tribes right out the gate, specifically spoken of inside Numbers 13, when the spies return and give their report of the land.
Yeah.
You think that's a possibility there? Because it seems like it to me.
Well, I would say 2 different things happen. You have if you understand the Rephaim and their other associated tribes are aboriginals to the land. They are in, let's say, the land of the covenant before the dispersion at Babel. So sometime after coming down the mountain of the Noahites, fallen angels like the Baalim of Mount Hermon, who are the ruling council of the gods, in Psalms 82 over the 70 nations, Deuteronomy 32, both before and after the flood, some of those angels would have taken forms of females and males, and they would have had probably, I think though, the original probably would have been males taking daughters of Canaan and producing giants. And then you would have had those Rephaim, or those giants, then taking daughters of Heth and Canaan and Sidon, and they're going to create the 9 patriarchless giants. So you have 2 different episodes where you create the giants and the hybrid giants, and the patriarchless nations like the Amorites, who are likely descended through a Rephaim of the Anakim, because the Amorites are blonde hair and blue-eyed, as what the Anakim are described as, or shown as in history and on reliefs. Then you have these hybrids
that link, Diane.
That would be working as this greater, taller than humans, 6 to 9 feet tall, as the Egyptians described them as the Shazoo, versus the taller giants that would be 10 to 14 feet tall, maybe 15.
Sure.
Yeah.
So dirty.
So what? So mad.
Efficient clean, even in
Yeah, Lynn, our prayers are with you, sister. You know that.
low temperature eco cycles.
Wow. And so going up to sizes, actually, reminds me, reading just in the first few chapters of Enoch, where it talks about the first children born to the watchers. It describes them in one accounting. I see it describe them as being 3,000 cubits tall. Another one describes them as being 3,000 ells tall, and there's a pretty significant difference in size there.
Well, we don't know what.
On that.
Yeah. So the Aramaic version says cubit. And the Giaz version, which is the more complete version, says L. And so cubit is not a dimension that was used before the flood. L would be. That would be a carryover, but nowhere do we get scripturally how big an L is. And it says 300 L's or 300 cubits. If it's 300 cubits, it's somewhere between 450 to 600 feet tall. That's just, yeah. So I'm thinking an L is a lot smaller type of dimension. That's an ancient term that we've lost the meaning for. Antediluvian giants are thought more likely to be between 20 and about 40 feet tall.
Wow.
And then the post-diluvian giants are going to be smaller. So Gilgamesh would be sort of the outer range that we get for sizing of 19 feet tall. So all throughout polytheist accountings, you see somewhere between, kind of like 9 to 14, 15, 16 feet tall for post-diluvian giants. Goliath was six cubits and a span, and the king of Gath. That Ashish succeeds Gath as king afterwards. And Josephus said that you should measure the giants on a royal cubit as opposed to a standard cubit. And just as Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, Goliath was the king of Gath, and the other 4 stones reserved for that day were for 4 other kings of the giants of the Philistine and Nephilim, if you had to use them that day. So he's 6 cubits and a span. So if you use an 18-inch cubit versus the 21, you're at 9 feet 9 inches. And if you're using the royal cubit, which I think should be applied and certainly was understood at that time, at the time of Josephus, that would be the dimension that you would use. It'd be 11 feet 3 inches. Now, the bed of Og was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. So he was the king of Ashtaroth and Edrei, and the last of the Rephaim. Giant, as it says, he is the last of the giants. That's the Hebrew word Raphaim, a post-diluvian giant. So that bed, using a royal cubit as 21 inches, would be about 16 feet long.
My goodness.
So if it's that size or a little bit smaller, it doesn't make that big a difference, but he's going to be somewhere between 12 to 13 feet tall to 14 to 15 feet tall, depending on royal or standard cubit, and I would lean to the higher one. And the bed was 4 cubits wide, so again it would be 6 to 7 feet wide. Now, so he's not as tall as Gilgamesh, and he's not quite as wide, but you get this 2-to-1 height to width ratio, which was a standard sizing for the giants versus the 3-to-1 of humans, because they're called stout in the King James Version Bible. And stout is also part of a definition for words like zaz and as, meaning strong and things like that. Stout as in muscle, as in wide, right? And that bed was to be assigned to all of the Israelites going forward, and it was on display at Ramah after the defeat of King Og, to show people how big the giants were, that they never forgot. It wasn't used for ritualistic things, although it could have been, but he would have had a bigger bed for his rituals, because he would have had many wives, right, as they did those fertility rituals. So this was his sleeping bed, not his ritual bed. And so he would have been 5 or 6 feet wide.
My gosh. Wow. Like, no wonder David's going for the headshot when he's slinging that stone. Like, it's just going to bounce off any other spot.
And he took his head with his sword.
Yes, he did.
Because it's important to understand this. This is you just don't do it for show, right?
Yes.
David's not there to have, he's a humble servant of God. And he's not there to sort of engage his ego, but he wants to show the head to all of Israel because they're afraid that Goliath is going to get up
And come a
kill
calling.
David, but come kill them as well, right?
Yeah.
And there's a deep-seated understanding there that is communicated in the story that the Rephaim and the Nephilim, and the Rephaim probably to a lesser degree than the Nephilim, as supposed to live in giants, had the ability to repair themselves. So you had to strike them in a way and with a sudden blow that they had no ability to repair themselves. So you cut everything off from the brain and the heart, and that would do it. And there's several examples in the Bible of this being done, and I cover that in the new book. But the understanding comes from, just as the terrible ones are described as strong, asses, and stout, the terrible ones are the ones are the giant kings, or the Rephaim kings, or like they're depicted in Ezekiel 32, speaking to Pharaoh in this dual prophecy from the sides of the abyss prison to another descendant of them who is representative of the Egyptian beast king or beast empire. This is a later version, but still a representative as such in that dual prophecy. And they are ones that did terrible things while on earth, and when they were killed, they went directly to the sides of the abyss. And there's other accounts of these terrible ones as well. But where I'm going with this is that they're described in terms that were stout and wide and strong, but they had a fertility issue as you define the terrible ones. I'll go down one more rabbit hole with this. So that's the Hebrew word. That's the Hebrew word arit. So they'd be the Eritim for the terrible ones. As you take that and put the I am plural, which means ones as in plural. So you have, I mentioned the Ugaritic text of the Baalim and the Rephaim and the creation, and they're trying to have them come back to create more Rephaim, similar to what's going on at Sodom and Gomorrah, I think. One possible answer to what's going on with that filthy conversation, as the New Testament calls it. And if you look at the second word of Ugarit, it's arit. So that's a city of terrible ones, but it's more than that. So the first word is Og. So if you look at Og, and you take that back to Hebrew, it's OWG. Its source word is Og, which is UWG. And this is, would be, you would look at it as, you would put it together in Hebrew as Kiriath Og Eritim. And it would mean city of the Og, the terrible one.
Wow.
And what's also sort of interesting about that sort of understanding is that Og is this renowned, terrible, fearsome sort of king, and Kiriath is also used for the title of the patriarch, the name of the patriarch of the Anakim, Kiriath Arba, as it's called in the book of Joshua, which is the former name of Hebron. So that's where I added in the Kiriath. And again, you get so much meaning out of the Hebrew, and it starts to make sense. And that Hebrew is based on Old Semitic, which is the root language, language that's used in the Ugaritic text. So you get words that match up, like Herman and Haram for the accursed oath and things like that. You just can't imagine how much information that you can use in context with what the Bible is saying that matches up perfectly with the Bible, with the Baalim Council on Mount Hermon.
Wow. Okay. So
I know I went down a rabbit hole.
No. It's perfect because I was gonna bring up Mount Hermon. Real quick though, I have somebody Common Core Reversal asked how big is a cubit? Now the original standard isn't that about 18 and a half inches, and then the Royals around 21-ish.
Yeah, 18 inches for a standard cubit. A royal, depending on the country, can go from 20.5 to 21 inches. And so there's a little bit of discretion on that, but Josephus used 21 inches.
Yeah, I know that's the royal cubit in Egypt was 21.
Yep.
So Herman, perfect segue there. All those little rabbit holes, they line up beautifully. So we see the washers in chapter 6. They're atop Mount Hermon and they're making this oath.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the end of it for Mount Hermon. But then when we get into the Gospels, we see the J-Man take his disciples on up that same mountain there in an event that Matthew, Mark describe as the Transfiguration. And he goes up that mountain, and that's where we see him. His clothes become white as light. He essentially shows them his real godly persona.
Wow, 24,000.
Now, I love the way Michael Heiser put this during that event there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. In his writings on the unseen realms, Michael talks about Jesus Christ when he walks up Mount Hermon there, and he does that, and they have the interaction with Elijah and Moses. That was Jesus more or less saying, "All right, y'all. All you fallen angels, all you ne'er-do-wells out here, I'm coming for you. I'm on your turf right now, and I'm laying claim to this whole place."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he underscores that as well before that, it's probably in similar sort of timing, but it's done at a separate time where he takes the disciples right up to Bashan. So there's no question which mountain he's at when he's going to Caesar Philippi. It's in Bashan at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he is declaring at that time, at the bottom of Mount Hermon, he doesn't go to the top, where you have the Pan Temple and where you have the gateways to Hades, that upon my rock,
I'll build this church.
I will build my church, and your time is over. And at this point, I don't even know about the resurrection yet. So they're probably wondering what the heck is going on here, but they're saying we're going to kill him anyway.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So they don't learn about it.
Okay, I missed the point he made.
On your turf right now, and I'm laying claim to this whole place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he underscores that as well before that it's probably in similar sort of timing, but it's done at a separate time where he takes the disciples right up to Bashan. So there's no question which mountain he's at when he's going to Caesar Philippi. It's in Bashan at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he is declaring at that time, at the bottom of Mount Hermon, he doesn't go to the top, where you have the Pan Temple and where you have the gateways to Hades, that upon my rock,
I'll build this church.
I will build my church, and your time is over. And at this point, I don't even know about the resurrection yet. So they're probably wondering what the heck is going on here, but they're saying we're going to kill him anyway.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So they don't learn about it until he tells the most impassioned ones that are in the abyss while he's in the grave what's actually going to transpire. And and I agree with Heiser that this is a foreshadow to where the showdown is going to be at Armageddon. So Megiddo doesn't have a mountain. Armageddon, Har is the Hebrew word for mountain, and it's a special mountain. It's the mountain of gathering. So Jehoshaphat is a allegory for the valley below Mount Hermon, as the book of Joel talks about. But this specific mountain is the mountain of sacred festivals. As you would take the meaning back to Hebrew, it's a mount of the assembly, the mount of the gathering. This is the Hebrew word moed, as we have it in more of a modern sort of Hebrew form. And so people don't sort of connect that to Armageddon because different sort of spelling. But in Moab, you have this sort of this ayin apostrophe. And in the time of the Tiberian transition of Hebrew, you had Old Hebrew going into this new Tiberian, and they take the ayin letter that would have a sort of sound as opposed to the hard G sound, like the Gimel sound that they use for transliteration into Greek for the New Testament for Armageddon. You have that go silent. And so an example of what I'm talking about is if you look at the city of Gomorrah, okay, they've applied the Gimel G there for G isn't the hard sound. But the Hebrew word is Amorah with the ayin. It is, so you get both mixes in the Hebrew that comes through. And so if you were to put that G back in as it would be understood in older Hebrew, and understand that this was happening in this transition in the time of John, so it wasn't complete, and the people outside the standard Judaic church were still using the older languages, and to understand it in Old Hebrew, it would be, Har Magaid, right?
Wow.
And this is the mountain of assembly, which is Mount Hermon. That's where the gathering of the armies is going to be at the end time, because Antichrist, when he sees something from the north and the east, as Isaiah 49 talks about, he sees Jesus coming from the north and the east. And so he starts to move from where he is because he's having a war with the king of the south somewhere in Africa somewhere. And he's going to come back up north and up the seacoast and then set his tents up at Armageddon, which is Mount Hermon, which is the most holiest place of the polytheists on earth. It is where the assembly of the gods are. That's talked about in Psalm 82, and where Satan has his seat above that council. So this is, it's all sort of, if you just let the Bible flow in the context of what they're talking about, everything sort of falls into place and makes sense. So again, I go through this, and there's a lot of detail as I go through this in the new book for the people. So
That's
another flavor of what's coming.
Yeah, and for those who love to see sort of a visual of the battles as they're going to be lined out, where the troops are coming from and where they're going, I'd encourage you to get Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. He's got some outstanding visual aids inside there and breaks down the entire thing, goes through the language and how we arrive with key players like Russia and China being involved in that whole affair.
And another thing to keep in mind about Mount Hermon is that it has several different names in the Bible. And one of them they're going to use as a counterfeit. And we're given that name. So, I mean, different peoples have different transliterations for Mount Hermon. And so in Deuteronomy 4, right at the end of the chapter, I think it might be 43, 45, it's called Mount Sion, S-I-O-N. And it's a different word than Zion. So
always a counterfeit.
Yeah, so this is going to be the Mount Zion of, or Sion, just as that's been translated as Sion in the New Testament in the King James Version, where it should be Zion. That is going to be used by the polytheists and part of that counterfeiting and credibility of Antichrist. So you also have this coded into the secret societies with the Priory of Sion, which was the parent organization to the Knights Templar that formed the Knights Templar. And
interesting. I would love to get into secret societies and some of the mysticism and the Enochian mysticism as well in another talk. I feel like we could riff on that for hours.
Yep.
Wow, lots of great information. If you guys haven't by now, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, please. I also have various social media links inside of our description as well. So here's another one for you here. Bashan is a key player, especially when it comes to discussing Og, king of Bashan, and him being, as the Bible quotes, like the last king of the giants during the conquest of Canaan. We have this really magnificent scene in Psalms 22, where even though it's David rendering the psalm, it seems to be the words of Jesus Christ as he's up on the cross. He talks about his bones being all out of joint, but not broken. We know that his body specifically, his bones were not broken, they were out of joint. But he says something really interesting there. And he says, behold, I am encompassed on all sides by the bulls of Bashan.
Yeah.
What is he referencing there when he makes that distinction?
Mm-hmm. Well, Bashan is part of Mount Hermon.
Okay. So
Mount Hermon is the location to the assembly of all polytheism on earth. So the bulls can be understood in a couple of ways. I mean, you have the cherubim who have 4 faces. One of them is either, you can look at that as an ox or a bull.
So he's more or less talking directly to the watchers at that point. Like I would imagine at that scene, they're probably surrounding Golgotha. They're watching, thinking, "Hey, we did it, boys. We won."
Yeah. And the demigods that were created, they're also kind of called bulls because they're strong as bulls and they're thick, and they are the fatlings of Bashan as part of the allegory as they're slaughtered in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And you get similar imagery at the Mount, at the Armageddon battle as well. And that imagery there is, again, to link you back to these bloodlines, back to these gods, back to their mountain, that we have to be aware of, even though our churches don't teach it. And in Isaiah 25, you have another counting of these terrible ones that in the end time are going to be destroyed on a mountain.
Wow, more credence to the big send off there being atop Mount Hermon.
Yeah. Now there's also a passage in the Psalms in 21, right before 22 that you're talking about, where he's dealing with all of these spiritual beings that are taunting him and doing all sorts of things, and who knows what they're capable of doing at that time, but they're certainly not making it any more pleasant for Jesus while he's on the cross. Not that could be pleasant to begin with, but in Psalms 21, it's talking about the time of the end time. In verses 9 through 11 is very, very enlightening, that, and you'll never hear this verse sort of talked about in church. You just won't. These things have to be not talked about, or they have to make up things that they get very uncomfortable with. So, and I'm just going to read it because it's just this powerful to understand why we have to understand things about the giants and how it's connected to the end time and our Resonatra. So it says, "Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger, and the Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath, and the fire shall devour them." So it's clearly an end time wrath, anger prophecy. Verse 10 gets really interesting here. "Their fruit thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from amongst the children of men." This is talking about a different set of beings than humankind. And it says in verse 11, "For they intended evil against thee, and they imagined mischievous device which they are not able to perform." So this is and they're called the specific branch of the terrible ones in Isaiah 25 that will be destroyed in the end time on the mountain.
Wild. Okay, so to that end, this is something that, and I guess to dig back in onto Enoch again here, we have this scene, which is like for those who haven't read the book of Enoch, it's broken up into several sections. The first one, you have this accounting of the Watchers, and I believe that goes it's like chapter 1 through, is it chapter 36? I think it is.
So
And then
right, yep.
yeah, and then after that you have Enoch's parables, and then you have this a sort of a lesson in astrology, or sorry, in astronomy, if you will, where it talks about the seasons of the sun and the moon, and then we have this letter to Noah, and then we have sort of this retelling of a number of very key happenings within the Bible. Actually, inside there, when it's describing lambs being led by a specific lamb being hunted by wolves or hunted by others, it actually lays out for us the story of Moses and them crossing the Red Sea. But inside there, we have this moment where it's talking about the angels that sin, the Watchers, being cast into the abyss by their fellow angels. This is in Enoch 54. And it talks about those iron chains of immeasurable weight, the ones that cannot be broken. But it went on to describe even more that furnace that you were just referring to, them being cast into a blazing inferno, as it were.
Yeah.
So, like, bearing what they did in mind for their sins, essentially teaching man how to sin so heinously against God, and in trying to pollute our gene pool. One of the speculations that
it's clearing
myself
up.
and I just come to find out that L.A. Marzulli actually holds the same idea in mind and belief about what the actual mark of the beast is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this here. For a while, I've been saying that the mark of the beast, while it will allow you to essentially have a stake in society at large, if you will, you can buy, you can sell, you can trade, do all those things, participate in society, but we're told inside the good book that the Rephaim, when they die, their souls are cursed to wander. The Bible describes them as the Greek word shades, and we know that they're essentially like the Walking Dead, zombies, if you will, but their spirits.
Yeah, in Hebrew, it's shade or Rapha.
Okay, yeah.
It's both in Hebrew, and
So,
then daemon in Greek.
Okay, perfect. So then my thought from that is, the reason why they're made ineligible for resurrection is that they're not human. They're not who Christ came to die for.
Their spirit's not directly from heaven. It's a counterfeit spirit.
Yeah. So the contention that I make is, I do believe that the mark of the beast is going to alter a person's DNA, is going to alter their genetic makeup, and is more than likely going to alter them so far in the spectrum towards Nephilim that they're no longer going to be constituted as human. And therefore, they'll be ineligible for resurrection because they won't be who Christ has died for.
Yeah. So I would say it's certainly part of what the mark of the beast is and does. It's a lot bigger than any one thing. Like, as you say, it's part of this larger system.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And it can control through that system, who doesn't take the mark to be killed. I mean, this is a talking image that comes with it that's connected to the mark of the beast. It's a tarot, a talking idol. It's probably a dwelling place for demons and AI and the combination of all of that. But so it's the mark that marks people for wrath. They choose that. And will it do horrible things and change things at the DNA level? Absolutely. But there's something else that we need to remember, that all of the sins of the world are forgiven through Jesus' sacrifice, except for one.
Blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So it's a little bit more than that, right? Than just the changing of the DNA. Because they're going to burn in the lake of fire forever.
Oh, it's the new Breeders' Choice Plus, Ginger. Same great 99% recycled paper cat litter, plus natural odor-eating probiotics. Breeders' Choice Plus. Choose better. Choose Ginger.
Doctors in Australia are demanding seniors to use this affordable smartwatch, this life-saving smartwatch.
That's not true.
So then there must, because the Bible makes it pretty clear that we're not going to be just simply duped into accidentally taking the mark. You're going to be presented a very clear choice, like, hey, this is what this entails. You accept this or you don't. I imagine that it probably comes with any number of what we would term as magical or superpowers, because we know that the angels had a litany at their disposal. But that's really interesting, the way you put it out there.
So imagine this system, and as the Davos crew, who answers to the Committee of 300 and are now working with the B20 and the G20 as of last October, imagine a system that they had envisioned in 2017, that the implant system, and we know the mark is an implant, forehead, hand, depending on what it is, it's some sort of implant, will be something that you probably swear an oath to as part of the harem anathema, and people will carry it out to the end no matter what the consequences are, which starts to answer the questions why, when they know they're marked, and they start to blaspheme God when these wrath judgments start coming on them. You have this implant system that they say will be delivered through the healthcare system because people will demand it. Right? Wow. That's the first part. There's more to this, so be a little bit patient with me as I lay this down.
It's all you, Gary. You take it.
So this is going to be able to work at the digital level, at the gene level, at the quantum level, at the bot level. So the technology is still developing. So we're talking about quantum mechanics, we're talking AI, different dimensions, and that this is part of adding the immortality aspect of godhood, which is being offered, and why people will want it to protect themselves for all of the other horrible things that are coming on the earth in terms of diseases and stuff. But they will also want godhood and immortality, and this is going to provide that. So it's going to do things automatically to strengthen them, change their DNA, medicate them, give them protection from the pestilences, all sorts of things through this system that's connected at this source of something that goes into multiple dimensions using the quantum aspect. Now, if we look at what they're looking for at CERN, and they're using AI and quantum computing so that they can get into multiple dimensions, they're looking for two things. One is a specific particle, and there's lots of different names for it, but it's not the real name that they're going to give you. They are looking for kinds of particles. Well, there's one in particular that I'll come back to. And so they're looking for that particle, and or they want to get into the other dimension, into Sheol, into Hades, to the location of the abyss, to let out their pantheon of gods, is one aspect. And secondly is to locate the Atma particle, or the Atman particle, as it's also called. Quantum computing is said to have a requisite to understand the Vedas and the Upanishads to be able to have built the original math of quantum math that built the quantum computers that all of the initial scientists studied. And in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, it talks about this Atman particle. We would understand it through the New Age as divine essence, which is a spirit that controls all the knowledge or the wisdom of the complete multiverse or the metaverses. And this we would understand as Sophia, wisdom, like philosophy, the love of wisdom, the love of Sophia, the mother goddess, right? This is a counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. This particle that they're looking for is invisible. You can measure for lack of a better term, because it's not visible, but you can measure particles that would be visible if you could see at that level. But an invisible one, you can't measure it. And it is this sort of like ghost-like particle that is invisible and merges with a measurable particle. And it contains all of the knowledge of everything that is, through quantum entanglement, dispersed instantaneously through all particles everywhere in all dimensions that has all the knowledge. So they're trying to find that particle, tap into that technology
long
because
time
of their
no
belief
see.
system. And just as what was offered in the Garden of Eden is you need unlimited knowledge as well as immortality. So what Satan was offering Adam and Eve was what they call the tree of wisdom, which unfortunately the book of Enoch calls it, which is a Gnostic corruption of the book. And there are some corruptions in First Enoch. That would be one of it, not the tree of good and evil, right? The knowledge of, they had some knowledge, but they didn't have all the knowledge. And Satan said that you'll be like God. You will have all this knowledge. And they already had immortality because they were eating from the tree of life. But as soon as they broke the one rule, they were ostracized from Eden and lost their immortality because they didn't have access to the tree of life. So they're trying to pair this back up and to come back to what the New Age or the Gnostics or Theosophy calls the estate of Eden, or Eden being reinstated as their sort of doctrine, and where you have immortality and all of that knowledge. But you're counterfeiting this essence into your body in the spirit form that changes you, which is the counterfeit of the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
That's what pushes it over the edge, I think.
Wow.
Okay, I missed that point. Talking to Valiant. What did you say?
Tree of good and evil, right? The knowledge of, they had some knowledge, but they didn't have all the knowledge. And Satan said that you'll be like God. You will have all this knowledge. And they already had immortality because they were eating from the tree of life. But as soon as they broke the one rule, they were ostracized from Eden and lost their immortality because they didn't have access to the tree of life. So they're trying to pair this back up and to come back to what the New Age or the Gnostics or Theosophy calls the estate of Eden, or Eden being reinstated as their sort of doctrine, and where you have immortality and all of that knowledge. But you're counterfeiting this essence into your body in the spirit form that changes you, which is the counterfeit of the Holy Spirit.
Bingo.
Wow.
That's what pushes it over the edge, I think.
Wow. Wow. Gonna sit with that for a second there. It goes right back to what we were talking about at sort of the top of the talk with the idea of a locality. Some of you have this singularity that becomes one with everything.
Yeah. It's a hive mind.
Wow.
The ultimate hive mind. And what was understood by the occult bloodlines is that you had, with these genes that you were provided, that also provided the bloodline that produces the Rh negative blood, gene of Isis, the Elven gene, the fairy gene, the gens Julia.
I never knew that.
Lots of different names for the.
I never knew that. Rh negative was fairy gene. Well, I never knew that.
Bloodlines that go back to the Nephilim and to Rephaim and to the fallen angels, is that you have inherited demigod traits, right? And one of them was the advantage to think in a hive mind, so that you could work together to accomplish things. And so when you have these 10 Rephaim kings, just as Deuteronomy or Daniel 2:43 in the Metallic Empires talks about, the descendants of these metallic empires are going to mix their seed, commingle their seed with that of humans. You have a different race again being talked about here, that they had these things that were being passed on. But these 10 kings in Revelation 17 talks about, with one like mind will hand their power over to Antichrist. This is the hive mind that they talk about. And the hive mind is this whole sort of queen bee. They raise that up to that Sophia level or divine essence counterfeit of the Holy Spirit in their pantheon. That sort of starts to come together. But there's one other interesting thing that people don't really realize, that sitting there in the Bible is how the Israelites were able to go up against the giants and the hybrid giants, right? And God said he would deliver them up for them. And we get a couple occasions on there where he might be sending hail at, the battle of Gibeon and places like that. But typically it says 3 times, I am going to deliver them up to you with hornets. Very, very odd, isn't it? And that it would totally discombobulate them so that they would be attacking each other and you just walk up and just kill them because they're just going crazy. The natural enemy of the bee and of the hive is the hornet.
Oh my gosh. Oh my, wow, that's so poetic.
Wow, that's a good line, Tricky. I've never heard that before. Good line, but
Panicked because they couldn't talk to each other. They didn't know how to do battle and do things without having that hive mind.
So essentially, one's feeling panic, they're all now feeling panic.
Yeah.
My goodness. Oh, we're going deep tonight, folks. Real deep tonight. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch back through this here and take myself some notes. I was a good boy this time around, trying to keep my eyes off the paper.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I remember specifically, there's one instance where we have the angel of the Lord who's talking about having fought for Israel. I believe it's in the book of Judges when he's talking about this. And he specifically says, I essentially routed them before you with hornets.
Yeah. 3 times we're told he will use hornets against the giants. And so what expects that was always, because they were always delivered up.
Wow. Man, we have really unpacked a lot here. We still got 20 minutes left.
That's why you have this hive mind that's so much in science, and it's also part of their history. And you have, like with the Anjou, they have, these emblems that look like fleur-de-lis, but they're actually an allegory for bees.
Wow, you can even look into entertainment. You look into Star Trek with the Borgs.
Yeah,
this
exactly the same thing. And it has a queen.
Man, it is so poetic.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and their transhumanism, like it's just they just encode it on all sorts of level as to who they are, where they came from, and what they're planning. You just have to understand the language they're talking in.
Well, and I wondered this too, with the trans agenda right now being what it is, and especially inside the United States, I have a very, very sneaky suspicion that the mark of the beast will allow you to change your sex at the drop of a hat, do the same sorts of manipulation to your body that the Watchers were able to do.
Yeah, so transhumanism, transgenderism has similarities and essentially different wings of the same tactic, part of the overall game plan. Overall strategy. And so the assumption is basically that your Oikatarian is just the body and the soul and the mind. They classify the mind and the soul as being similar. It's not quite how we would understand it biblically, because the spirit merges with the soul, which is part of this world, and then the mind, it comes from the merging of the soul and the spirit. But they say the soul and the mind are the same thing, and that the body is like a sleep. That you can replace a new body, transfer the consciousness, but you can only do that within the physical world. And if you notice, they never talk about the spirit. Everything in polytheism downplays the spirit because that comes from God. It's only about the soul that's part of this world.
It's like,
again, if you understand their understanding and their language, you start to know what they're talking about. So when they look at a spirit angel, it has no gender, but they can choose a gender. So if you're going to be a little god and raise yourself up to be that level, in this art analogy through the soul versus the spirit, which permits you to choose your gender, you can be gender fluid, which is the other doctrine that that you can change your understanding of your gender as you go through your life. So that's that whole sort of complete allegory of their doctrine.
It's going to make it look so sexy to those who are already deluded and are confused. It's going to make it look so sexy to them.
Yeah. They can't talk about the spirit because then it would make their belief system look inferior.
Yeah, it's very much like the same idea behind. There's actually a fantastic anime called Ghost in the Shell, where people they upgrade their bodies into like android type bodies or robots, and they're just depositing the soul from one into the other. Same with the show Altered Carbon, where they actually call their bodies sleeves. Yeah, we're on the same wavelength.
Yes.
Okay, so sort of with our last 15 minutes, I would love to address the presentation of this apocalypse taking place towards like the middle to the latter half of Enoch, where it's describing like I should preface by saying, for those who haven't read Enoch, there are some beautiful moments inside there where it talks about rewards that will be lavished upon those who are following the elect one, Jesus Christ. But by and large, the book is really a it's sort of the death knell for those who are going to live a life of sin, never come on home to redemption, and it really explains in sort of graphic detail what's going to happen to the watchers and those who are deceived.
Yeah.
I'd love to see what are your thoughts with when it describes when it's describing not just the watchers that did sin with human females being cast into the pit, but then we have this talk inside Enoch about Christ riding in with his elect. We see the same scene playing out inside Revelation, where he comes with a robe dipped in the blood of his enemies, and they essentially lay siege to the cities of men. That in conjunction with Revelation 9, where we have the king reigning over the locusts in the abyss. We have Apollyon or Abaddon, and they come out. And we have this humongous power encounter on the earth. Where does Enoch line up with the Bible in that event?
Well, Enoch lines up well with end time prophecy. So one of the issues, though, with the book of Enoch is it seems to have had additions to it, which seem to be almost sort of added in from sort of New Testament, from the age of things. So, but it does add, it does follow prophecy quite closely. So whether it's true ancient prophecy or more of the, let's say, 200 AD version of the addition into it. Hard to know, but it does line up very, very well, just as the line mentioning in the book of Jude about Enoch matches up almost word for word in the book of Enoch. So we know there was an original Hebrew manuscript. What we don't know is how much has been added to it. And there's theories of how many different writers there were for this. And so, but some of it is going to be for sure that comes out of what they think is part of the lost hagiography that we're talking about, like from the Toledoth of Adam and the Toledoth of Noah, and some of those versions which make up what we look as the older part of Enoch. The prophetic side, it's really hard to know because Enoch lived before the flood. So, and it's talking about in some places in the book of Enoch about the tribe of Dan in Bashan. Well, that's like an after writing in terms of how that's put in. So there's some additions. So we have to be careful. And in a document I have on the book of Enoch, I actually have some of the corruptions that you want to be aware of, even though I like it a lot and runs 99%. One of those obvious corruptions is it has the angels making the ark for Noah. Yeah, that's that's polytheist version, right? So there's corruption in there, but again, we don't have that complete Hebrew manuscript. It's got Enoch 500 years old, twice. Well, Enoch was taken to heaven at 365.
Wow.
Another thing I noticed inside the book of Enoch too was you don't have talk inside there of like a being forgiven of sins, sort of a once and for all type of thing. There's a number of moments where it really seems like your entrance into eternity is really contingent on the works that you do. And we know according to the Bible that's not the case.
Yeah. So, and yeah, and so we just want to be careful. So even with the book of Enoch, where it doesn't line up perfectly with the Bible, can't use it. But there's a lot in there that I think is, because I do like it a lot. So we want to be a little bit careful with it. So one of the things that you don't really see in the book of Enoch is the lake of fire.
Yes, it talks about like a hot place, and it talks about like a furnace type place, but you don't see the lake of fire.
Yeah, in the book of Enoch, they're only talking about the pit prison. They're talking about a place of fire and ice where the watchers are going to.
Interesting.
And the pit is in Sheol, in Hades, but in a specific place and probably in another dimension. The lake of fire is somewhere else. And that's because I don't think that it was wanted to be made known to the angels at that point in time about the lake of fire. We really learn about the lake of fire, other than some references to maybe fire in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, the lake of fire. And in Matthew 25, we're told that the devil and his angels are going to go to that lake of fire, and that the people who take the mark of the beast are going to go to that lake of fire. One would presume many of the Rephaim and the Nephilim are going to go to the lake of fire, unless they chose God and followed Jesus at some point in time. So, and the lake of fire is also the place of the second death. So there's specific people that aren't going to die in that lake of fire, and there's people that will die in that fire. So the lake of fire, it's another thing that's poorly translated in the Old and the New Testament, is they conflate hell into one concept. That's actually three different places.
I notice also that, and this is unfortunately this really became mainstream Christian belief in the wake and really heavily proliferated by the Catholic Church, that they believe Satan reigns in hell, as though hell and all its red delights are being carried out by him and his minions, which is not the case.
No, he reigns on earth.
Yeah, he is the prince of the power of
this world. Yeah,
and I like that Enoch does not feed into that misunderstanding that Satan is somehow like king of this underground area. We have our 9 rings of hell.
If you want to look at it prophetically, he will be the king of the lake of fire. He's there forever. But other people that he can reign over, who are all being punished there as well. But that's not today. Man, and first he's got to go to the abyss for 1,000 years, and then to the lake of fire.
Boy, that's going to chafe. Spending eternity in a prison where you put 90% of the inmates there yourself.
Yeah.
Goodness. Wow. So, we'll start to wrap it up here. We got about 8 minutes left. But for those who are wondering, okay, we've talked about Enoch, we've talked about the Watchers, the angels, we talked about these different classes of angels, these different classes of beasts. If you're wondering what does it matter to know this information, a big reason, at least from what I've been able to deduce in my own study, there's sort of a twofold reason in why it's helpful to know this information, know who the Nephilim were, know who the Watchers were, what they did, and what their sin meant for mankind. Is number one, if you look at it from an apologetic standpoint, it gives you a reason for the wartime violence inside the Bible. Anytime you don't see Israel, that's when they're having either a civil war amongst their own tribes, or they're fighting with the progeny of Lot. They are fighting these Nephilim and Rephaim tribes. So it gives a reason, as Peter would say, for the hope that is in you, to be able to explain to somebody.
Sure, and understanding that the Nephilim and all of those tribes swore in an oath, as the book of Psalms talks about, to conspire to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, to be remembered no more.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. Because even God says that he's going to blot out the name of the Amorites from completely off the earth. And now I'm picturing more hornet activity in my mind here. But the other part of why it's pertinent to understand this information is that knowing the basis of this, understanding what the Genesis 6 conspiracy was all about, what that event was, it gives you an understanding of just how important it is to recognize your pedigree within the kingdom. You're not born of angels. You're born of God, and he put his spirit inside of you. Recognizing that their entire aim from beginning to end was to corrupt the bloodline so dramatically that God couldn't even look at his people on earth that he created as human anymore, and would make us damned creations for all time. Like it's a very heavy thing to have to sit with. And then when you look at what will happen as Jesus describes the end times being as the days of Noah, this resurgent of these Nephilim and Rephaim genes through humanity again. It's all done in an effort to change you from being his elect.
Yep, and to not be raised into immortality, to be like angels. That's the whole plan. And the Amalekites is a perfect sort of post-Diluvian story. And so they were wanting to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, and they led other people into it. That's why you have the Psalms referencing the nations that were conspiring to do that. And it was greater than that, because the Amalekites were doing it for a reason, just as the Midianites were. So, you know, the Midianites, for example, derived from Abraham and through a concubine of Abraham. So they have an inheritance right if Israel's not there. So they're going to be part of it. The Amalekites even have a stronger inheritance claim if Israel is not there. So the Amalekites are born from Eliphaz and Timnah. Timnah is a Horim. Eliphaz is the son of Esau. Esau is the brother of Jacob. Jacob took the blessings of the Messianic blessing, the birthrights, and the three sets of major promises for Jacob, and that changed his name to Israel and begets the Israelites to bring about the Messiah. If the Amalekites with this Sion Rephaim bloodline, because Timnah is a Horim, as it's accounted for in Genesis 36, and a new dynasty with a purebred fairy queen, and the dupes were Alephs, where you get the elven elf allegory that goes with that Genesis 36 side of the bloodline of the giants that are trying to get a hold of the birthrights through the Amalekites, that they're going to replace Israel completely and supersede and take the Messianic blessing to produce their dragon Messiah. There was so much at play there with the Amalekites, why they had a transgenerational blood oath to wipe them from the face of the earth. So you have Agag, who is the patronymic king title of the Amalekites in the time of the Exodus. You have another Agag in the time of King Saul.
You do, the one that old Samuel hacks to pieces.
Yeah, and Saul violates his claims to the monarchy because he doesn't carry it out, because these are the people that want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. It's a blood oath. That's transgenerational. Then you have Haman the Agagite. An Agagite is synonymous with Agag and an Amalekite who's sitting at the highest royal court of the Persian Empire, who wants to wipe Judah, the southern kingdom that's left, from the face of the earth in that time.
Man, these guys are really one note, aren't they? Goodness.
Yeah,
and I love that he gets skewered down on that pike. That is just fantastic.
So it starts to, when you start to connect the dots on some of the things, it starts to explain things, and it brings the Old Testament to life, and it starts to help you decode what's going to happen in the end time, because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. It happens over and over and over. So just as Satan originally stormed heaven to try and put his is thrown in heaven and to be like God, Antichrist and Satan will do that again in the end time.
Well said. That is a perfect note to end on there. Thank you so much, Gary, for taking the time to walk us by the hand, as it were, through the book of Enoch, and how it relates to the Bible and our Christian walk. I know I learned a ton more from this conversation than simply just reading the book itself. And for those of you who want to see just how deep this rabbit hole goes, I want to again refer you to Gary's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. You can find it on Amazon, and you can find it in both Kindle form and in paperback form. Paperback it is $26.99. Kindle it is $9.99. I'll tell you what, the Kindle one can be definitely deceiving because it looks like 1,800 pages when you're looking at the Kindle document. And I'm looking over here, minus the works cited, we're around 700 for the actual paperback itself.
And I would suggest people buy the book sooner than later if you're interested, because the Amazon retail price shows $29.99. That will be moving up to about $34.60, from what I was told today from my publisher, because costs have gone up like 30% in the last couple of years. So
okay, so jump on it. Excuse me, jump on it, y'all. Gary is a wealth of knowledge, and it is worth getting this book for the sources cited in the endnote section alone. He's done an incredibly thorough job, and as he said before, he's a Christian contrarian. So that means that if there is even the smallest doubt that something could not be what it claims to be, Gary is going to go and do his due diligence, and he's going to find every single iota of truth inside there and present it inside here. Also, we have his website up here, thegenesis6conspiracy.com, where he does have a fantastic and very generous excerpt of his book on there. Jump on there and pour through some of this stuff. You will be enriched for the effort, and you will learn more than a thing or two. Again, Gary, thank you. Gary, thank you so much again for hopping onto the stream with us. Any final words for our listeners tonight?
Yeah, I would, sort of, this is new information to you, it's you're going to have some sort of cognizant dissonance for a bit, but once you understand that what's going on, it starts to make sense. And when I ran across after I read The Late Great Planet Earth, and it got me sort of down this path, and I thought I'd track all of the different prophecy narratives, and you have to start at the beginning of the book, and very early on you get into Genesis 6, and I'm logging everything dutifully and putting everything into what I think are all the different sort of narratives, and you run across these giants, and it's like, I don't have anything to do with that. That's crazy talk. That's not what I was planning to do, so I'm going to ignore it, right? Because I don't want to deal with it, but it keeps coming up. And so I don't believe that the Bible ever contradicts itself. So it just explains things, and if you let it. So it's difficult, and you're going to meet up with a lot of headwinds on people of saying that didn't happen, that's not true. I don't know why people want to discount what it says in the Bible in simple, plain language, and you can take it back to the original language, and it underscores that it's not making this up. But it does help to understand this world, how we got here, what's going on today, and what's going to happen. And we can't necessarily change it, but we can change things for the better by helping other people understand. And I think the closer we get into what I think we are in the fig tree generation, it's very important.
It is indeed.
That we have people at least be planted with seeds of things that when you start to see some of these things, you need to sit up and pay attention, because there's only so much time you're going to have to address
stop
it.
scratching, you're rocking the laptop.
Amen. Thank you for that, Gary. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our 2 super chats here. We had Rigovich said, I watched every Nephilim tribe 4 times. Thank you so much for the super chat. I'm glad that we were able to keep you spellbound, as it were. And then we have Susan Donahue with her super chat, says thank you. We got some hands, a heart, and we got an olive branch. Thank you all for watching this stream tonight. Please share, like, subscribe, smash all those buttons down there. I also do stream on Rumble. And if you like the work that I do, please consider supporting me on Locals. You'll find all the links in the description box down below. Till next time, everyone, we're going to be looking at doing a stream June 14th. So keep an eye out for that topic to follow. But you all have a wonderful night. God bless you and yours, and we'll see you next time.
Where was it? Hang on.
Gifts to spoil mum, bathroom luxury, sleep on silk, or a final touch. Treat your mum this Mother's Day at Pillow Talk. We've had some difficulties.
Apparently marriage has challenges.
I don't know. Can we trust each other? Faith. Annoying answer.
Agreed.
The brand new season of The Great premieres Saturday only on Stan.
Other than the Church of England, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish.
It was really good, wasn't it, Tricky? That's one of the best Gary Wayne interviews I've seen. I learned a few things off that. That was actually really good.
Muslim and Sikh leader.
Okay, Baz. Good night, mate.
Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is Dr. William Snubland coming to you from With One Accord Church Ministries with a sort of a more or less warning and exhortation concerning the events that are going on or just transpired this very day. As most of you probably know, today, May 6th, Charles is crowned King of England and, the United Kingdom in Westminster Abbey in London. And you might think, well, what's that got to be a warning about? Well, there's a lot going on here, and I don't want to try and repeat things that I've said in earlier videos, but there's a lot to be concerned about concerning, the royal family and where it has been taking England in the last century or so, and most especially in the last couple of decades. So I'm saying be afraid, be very afraid. And remember that Yeshua is our only king. I don't care if you're in England or Scotland or Ireland or America, Yeshua is our king. Everybody else is a false pretender. So that being said, I want to read something. This is a statement about the ceremony after the fact from Fox News. And it says that this was one of many faiths and languages to signify the new king as a unifying figure in the United Kingdom. For the first time, a monarch was crowned in a ceremony that included the active participation of other faiths, other than the Church of England. Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh leaders took part in various parts of the coronation. The Archbishop of Canterbury's office described it as an act of Christian worship that reflected contemporary society. The ceremony also featured female bishops, as well as hymns and prayers sung in Welsh, Scottish, Gaelic, and Irish Gaelic, as well as English. The king wanted the ceremony to reflect the whole of the United Kingdom and be representative of many backgrounds and faiths. He wants to set the tone right from the start, said some fellow named Felton Spence. Don't know who he is. But anyway, that sounds all noble and wonderful and all that, but it hides a lot of darkness, and we're going to get into that. I mean, first of all, in my earlier videos, about 2 months ago at least now, I did videos, 2 rather lengthy videos on the.
Did you see in the coronation, they put like a little tent blockage around him because whatever happens with the cardinal and the king, it's done in private. Did you see him put that screen around him?
Devils of Windsor, and we'll put links to those down below. I don't want to repeat too much of what's in those, but I just want to highlight a few things in the light of what's happening today. First of all, of course, this is a huge media event, just like the coronation of his mother was back in, I think it was 1952 or 1953.
53.
Big deal. And, you know, there were thousands of people there and others watching on TV all over the world, I'm sure. I chose not to watch it, but I picked up glimpses of it. And you know, a few things I want to comment on before I get into the broader issues. Number one is, dating back many centuries, there's been this idea that you anoint the king of England, that the Archbishop of Canterbury does this. And of course, this goes all the way back to the Bible. There's nothing per se wrong with that. I mean, you know, like we see Samuel anointed David to be a king, and that was carried on even way back in the days of Israel. So that's okay, as long as you kind of understand there's a spiritual component to all this.
Yep.
And the fact that this anointing took place in secret behind this screen, this very elaborate screen that was set up, it was created by craftspeople over there in Britain. And nobody could see it except presumably the Archbishop of Canterbury and his immediate, you know, assistants there. What were they hiding?
Very much so,
supposedly
Tricky.
they had this olive oil from the Mount of Olives over in Jerusalem, and they take a golden flask and a little golden spoon, and they take him and they anoint him on his head and his chest and on his hands. And I mean, that doesn't sound like something that you need to necessarily hide from everybody, but they did. And of course, that invites speculation. What else may have been done? We don't know. But knowing how for centuries the crown has been steeped in Freemasonry, one can't help but
Probably Charles spat on the Bible when that screen was around him. What else could it be?
If there was something going on of a Masonic nature. The funny thing is, too, is that this screen itself was this kind of childlike looking thing of a tree with 12 birds in it and angels flying around with trumpets and all that. I mean, it doesn't look like anything very elaborate. And at the base of the tree was Charles's, you know, symbol. You know, they have this thing where you have the letter C and the little letter R, you know, for Charles Rex, Charles King. And then at the bottom was this banner which read, "All shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well."
What?
I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a nice sentiment. What does it mean? All manner of thing shall be well. I mean, I'm sure they know English well enough over there in England that it should be things. So, you know, all of this stuff, it's just so weird. And understanding the background, and I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, the fact that Charles is really into ecology and really into saving the planet and the green movement and all of that. I mean, he's just huge into that. He's probably one of the most powerful people in the world that's pushing it and has been pushing it for decades. I mean, his father, Prince Philip, was into it too. So this has been going on for a generation. So I don't know if there's some secret meaning in that rather odd phrase. I mean, yeah, I hope all is well too, but you know, I'd rather have everything be under the banner of Yeshua than have everything be well. As we'll see here, like the statement I just read is a cringing example of what Christian writer Gary North called political polytheism. The fact that if we want to honor, the idea, well, in America, we of course have the First Amendment, and in Britain they don't, but they're obviously being very pluralistic, very multicultural. That's the big thing now. And they're basically treating all religions as equally valid, and that's a lie. There's nothing true about that. And there's nothing good about the idea of, Muslims and Jews and Anglicans and Sikhs and whatever other people might have been there praying together. That is not scriptural. It says in Ephesians chapter 5, we quote this verse a lot, but it says in verse 11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, and rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. And all of these other religions are works of darkness. I mean, even Judaism, for all of its goodness, denies Yeshua. And there can be no fellowship with these other faiths, as much as they want to, create this kumbaya, let's all get around a campfire and sing. No, that's not scriptural, and it just is one more indication that Charles is not a Christian monarch in any sense of the word. We're going to get more into that in a moment. The thing is, there's all this tradition around, and I don't want to belabor that, but I mean, I understand why they're doing it. I mean, like, the crown that he's wearing is called King St. Edward's crown, goes all the way back to, I guess, 1661. That was when England was Christian. England is not really Christian today. I mean, he and his mother, Queen Elizabeth, have presided over a country which basically started out as pretty much Christian. And in a matter of, during her reign, which was 70 years long, basically the country has sunk into an abyss of multicultural swill. I mean, right now, there are fewer Christians in England, according to a recent poll, than there are non-believers or Muslims. There are actually more Muslims than Christians now in England. And I'm just going to, I'm not trying to make something out of that. I'm just saying that basically the gospel has been quenched in that country, and Christians are persecuted. I read an article where a Christian pastor in England was arrested for standing in a crowd and crying out, "There is no king but Jesus." That's kind of scary.
Wow.
Because he's right. There is no king but Jesus. All the rest are pretenders. So, there's danger here lurking in the midst of all of this tradition and pageantry and, all this stuff. So, okay, he's got this crown, and he's also given this orb. It's called the Orb of the Sovereign. And it's basically this big golden sphere with a cross on top. And of course, all this stuff is full of jewels and gold and all of that. And I guess that for over 100 years, the crown, the St. Edward's crown, had this real expensive Kohinoor diamond, which I guess was the largest diamond in the world. And it was stolen basically from India. And finally, out of respect, I don't know what happened to it, but they didn't put it in the crown. They put a bunch of other diamonds in instead. Who knows where they got those from? They probably stole them from somebody else. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound spiteful here, but, I guess I am just so tired of hearing about the royal family and all this royal soap opera stuff. Anyhow, there's important spiritual things going on here. This is a magical ritual. It is an act of ceremonial magic, just as much as if these people were in a magic circle, waving around swords and, incense and all of that, because it's not really Christian. I mean, it can't be Christians if there's Sikhs and Muslims and Buddhists running around, participating in it. And of course, Charles, when his mother, back in the early 50s, was crowned, she was proclaimed to be the head of the Church of England. The sovereign has been the head of the Church of England since back in the days of Henry VIII, which of course is centuries ago. And she was declared to be the defender of the faith. You know, that's great. But now Charles has made it very clear he wants to be the defender of faiths, plural. So no longer is there one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father Almighty. No, 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 no. We can't have that, even though it's right here in the Bible. No, we can't have that. So he's the defender of faiths, which sounds so much more politically correct. So, you know, this orb, to get back to that, I mean, it symbolizes the sovereignty of the King of England over his realm, king or queen, and then the sovereignty supposedly of Christ over the king. But the problem is that's not the case anymore. I mean, it may have been the case with Elizabeth, bless her soul, but it's not the case anymore. It's another lie. And, you know, we have to ask, is Charles even a Christian? So when he was made king this morning, he became the de facto sovereign over 56 countries that make up the Commonwealth. That's a lot of countries. I mean, that's like a third of all. I think there's something like 195 countries in the world that are recognized. So that's like almost a third of the countries in the world he has spiritual authority over. And if you understand how that works in terms of spiritual warfare, you need to be on your toes, especially if you're in one of those countries. I mean, the most obvious ones are, of course, England and Northern Ireland and Canada and Australia and you know, obviously 50 or so others that are mostly rather small. But so he has an enormous amount of spiritual power, and this has been invested in him by someone. And I dare say it's not Yeshua, because Yeshua is not going to, or you know, honor somebody like that who denies the uniqueness of Calvary, who denies the soul saving power of Yeshua and his cross and his resurrection. No, he might go through the motions and have this. I mean, let's face it, even the last 2 or 3 Archbishop of Canterbury have all been a bunch of heretics. I mean, you know, they ordain homosexuals, they ordain lesbians, they have, I mean, it's just a total mess. To such an extent, they actually have a splinter group. I mean, I think it's in America and in Africa that is split off from the Anglican Church over this kind of apostasy, because they won't have it, and good for them. But, you know, so that's a big problem spiritually. And again, I said this is one of these other videos I did on the royal family. But if you are in one of these countries, I strongly, and I don't mean to have you be unpatriotic, but you need to renounce Charles as your liege lord and sovereign, quote unquote. Another thing is he is kind of literally the high priest of this eco-nut green gospel. And I've got to give Sheila Zielinski credit for that. She wrote a book, I think it was a year ago or so, called The Green Gospel. And that's a great term for this whole ecological fanaticism that we've been laboring under for the last 7 or 8 years, you know. And he is one of the main, he's certainly the most powerful now proponent of, you know, climate change and all the necessary things we need to do to stop global warming or whatever the heck they're calling it now. And, you know, additionally, he is, you know, as sovereign, he is now the head of the Order of the Garter. And I talked about this somewhat in one of my previous videos, but it's a witchcraft / free Masonic order. It's the highest Masonic order in the world, and he's now the head of it.
Wow.
So if you're a Mason and you needed any more reasons to get out of Masonry, that should be one of them. But because Masonry is rotten to the core. And I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes, but I don't want to make this too long. But again, this is he is the head of this Order of the Garter, which is basically goes back almost 1,000 years, and it basically creates this dual thing in the British monarchy, where the King of England is both swearing allegiance, quote unquote, to Christianity and to paganism or witchcraft whenever he's made a king. I mean, that was going on nearly 1,000 years ago, and maybe that was what was going on behind the screen. I don't know. Or it may have been done in secret. But I know it's going on. I mean, it went on with Queen Elizabeth, and I have no reason to think of anything that's probably worse now with her son Charles. Okay, now you got to understand this about Freemasonry. I've done many videos and DVDs on Masonry, but you need to understand that the secret core, the secret sacrament of Freemasonry involves sexuality and pedophilia. Masons, and I'm not saying all Masons are pedophiles, but a lot of the high-level ones are, just as we're now finding out that high-level people in both Britain and America and probably other countries as well are all pedophiles. They all, are craving sex with children at best. That's the best thing you can say about these people, because some of them eat the children. I mean, literally, Yah forbid. And they have this twisted idea that by doing that, they can live longer, that they can live forever. Because these young children, whether they're toddlers or whatever, they have years and years of life in their blessed little bodies. Well, I don't need to paint a picture. It's sick and it's twisted and it's horrible, and Charles is up to his eyeballs in it. There are so many things wrong with this, and it's like pretty obvious that the monarchy is trying to have a foot in two worlds: the world of paganism and Freemasonry, and the world of at least superficial Christianity. And you can't do that. Yeshua said no one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or he will despise the one and follow the other. And that makes perfectly good sense, but that's what these people are trying to do, and no wonder they're going crazy. Now, in the course of my research, I mentioned earlier the wonderful work of Tim Cohen in his book, The Antichrist and the Cup of Tea, but there's another guy out there, I think his name is Craig Bong, B-O-N-G, believe it or not, that's his name, and he's done a lot of interesting work on the recent stuff that's come out. He demonstrates the fact that if you look at the invitation, these fancy invitations that were sent out, because as you probably know, only a few hundred people were invited to go into the Abbey, Westminster Abbey, and be a part of this thing. And there's all these flowers, and it's very elegant. But then at the bottom, I'm going to put it up on the screen, there's this rather prominent image right in the center of the Green Man. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the Green Man is a vegetation god of pagan Britain, and he's basically like Pan. I assume most of you have heard of, the great god Pan, quote unquote, and he's a demonic, pantheistic figure. Now, what is this thing doing on an invitation to a supposedly Christian ritual? Now, mind you, in this thing that was put out by Fox News that I read at the start of this, there was no mention there of there being any druids invited or any witches invited. And I find that remarkable, because I bet there were druids and witches there. They just probably didn't want to make a thing out of it. But here they basically have the image of Pan, the image of the horned god of witchcraft, right on the invitation. Now, the other thing, and I had never seen this before, but this fellow Craig Bond, he pointed out the fact that Charles has this signet
Frank Bung.
that he's worn, I don't know, maybe since he was a teenager, a ring. And it's also kind of like one of his personal seals. They have all kinds of these seals and everything. But this one, it's basically 3 ostrich feathers, 1 in the middle and 2 coming off either side, and placed in a coronet, a little crown. And underneath that is his motto, which is in German, Ich dien, which means I serve. Now that sounds real noble and all that, doesn't it? But he points out, I'm going to put this image up on the screen, that when he was speaking to, I think it was some part of the World Economic Forum, couple of years ago, they put a stylized version of this up on the screen behind him. They have these huge screens now for these events. And it was divided up. Each of these plumes was turned into rainbows of light. And each one had 666 coming out of it. And you'll see the image. I hope you can put it up there. And it's like, there it is, And I know I've kind of been on the fence about this. Is Charles the Antichrist? I don't know. I certainly think he is.
I knew about the Green Man when I was into all that sort of New Age stuff. I did know about him.
An Antichrist. And he certainly is positioning himself to be the Antichrist. And, we don't know. This is all in the hands of Yeshua, but the fact of the matter is he is the documented leader. And again, I talked about this in earlier videos of the Great Reset, of these globalization initiatives. This thing, you will eat bugs and you will be happy and you will not own anything. He's the major force behind that. He's bigger in all this than this weird, creepy Bond villain guy Schwab. Excuse me. So, the other problem with Charles is, he now has, as king, the political clout to push all of this along even further. Additionally, he has documented friendships with some of the most notorious pedophiles in all of England. And this Seville guy, and again, I talk about this in an earlier video, I'm not going to go into it, but, the guy hangs out with some very creepy people, or at least he used to. Buckingham Palace is full of confirmed bachelors, which is a fancy way of saying they're sodomites. And in the midst of all of this, we have to ask, looking back on Princess Diana and why she died. Why did she have to die? Did she know things about Charles that were just too dangerous to be let out? And I mean, this is all very conspiracy theory type stuff. But, and again, we did a whole video.
Yep, it's 1 day old.
About the right of the divine king and Diana's death, which I believe was a murder. I believe she was killed partially for political convenience and maybe because she knew more than the monarchy wanted to get out. But I will just end with this, and I'll close with some thoughts and a prayer. But I just want to remind you, I talked about this in earlier videos.
Actually, I'll finish on a couple of Jews fighting Christ testimonies.
Since the last few years of Victoria's reign and on to the Edwardian era and then the Georgian era with, George V and so on, all the way up to Elizabeth, lots of little children have been disappearing. Hundreds of little children have been disappearing under Elizabeth's reign. We don't know where they went. A lot of them were Aboriginal children in Australia. A lot of them were native Canadian children from up in the western part of Canada, which is both those countries, of course, are under the monarchy. They're part of the Commonwealth. Where did these children go? What was done to them? I mean, nothing can be proven at this point, but I do know there were actually warrants out for the Queen's arrest in, I forget, it was one of the provinces of Canada. It might have been British Columbia or Manitoba, I can't recall, for kidnapping these children because they just vanished. And of course, they were mostly orphan, Native Canadian children, so nobody cared. But it's a tragedy. And this is a bloody throne that's been built on blood and violence and pillage and thuggery and drug dealing for centuries. For centuries. And it's nothing to celebrate. It's nothing to get all gooey-eyed about and teary-eyed. And I'm sorry if you're English and you're watching this and I'm offending you. I don't mean to, because this isn't about you. I love the English people. I've been over there. I've ministered in England and in Scotland and right in London. I love the English people, but your monarchy stinks to high heaven and has done for at least a century and probably more like 500 years. So I exhort you to please, if you're
exactly right, Tricky. You said something about Australia too, but I'm with you.
Anyhow involved with the British monarchy, if you're one of these 56 nations that are part of the Commonwealth, then pray and renounce it. And if you're an American, and I said this the last time we did a video on this subject, but I need to emphasize it. If you're all just goo-eyed and just enamored totally of, oh, the royal family, oh, I can't wait to hear what's going on, stop that. Yeshua is your king. These people are at best a bunch of empty-headed twits, and at worst they could be monsters. At least the senior members of the royal family. Obviously, I'm not talking about the young people. So, in any event, renounce your allegiance, whether it's political or whether it's just a matter of, oh, you're so fascinated with them as media celebrities. You need to renounce that and declare your allegiance to Yeshua, who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Glory, hallelujah. And that needs to be done, because this is idolatry of a sort. You're putting these people with feet of clay like Charles and Elizabeth or whoever on a pedestal that they do not deserve to be on. Again, we have no king but Yeshua. And I'll just close with a brief prayer. Father, thank you that we have a king that is good, that is perfect, that is all powerful. Thank you that he watches over our lives and the lives of our children. And Father, we just declare our allegiance anew to Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, as our only King, our only Lord, our only Sovereign, and to him alone we owe allegiance. And Father, we do pray right now in Yeshua's name that you would remove the talons of the British monarchy from the hearts of everybody who's listening to this video. We pray, Father, that you would take the sword of the Spirit and the battle axe of, Elohim, and just shatter any chains of darkness or deception that might be holding any person, whether they're in the Commonwealth of the UK or whether they're in America or wherever, if they're being held in any kind of bondage or glamour to these royals, that you would just shatter that power over them forever. And instead, Father, release them to serve you, the only true Elohim, in Yeshua the Messiah, whom thou hast sent. And Father, I pray that you would, instead of letting this be the open doorway into a new world of hellish stuff spewing forth from the British throne, that instead that you would just stomp on it, Father, that you would crush their plans into the dust with the power of the cross of Calvary, and let this be instead a time of birth of freedom in Messiah, and a time when the powers of darkness will be crushed, in a time when the doors of evil will be slammed in the face of the devil, that he would be locked in and not be able to trouble us who serve thee, the true and living Elohim. And finally, Father, we pray your protection about everybody who's watching this video. We pray that you would bless them and protect them and empower them and embolden them to be powerful witnesses to Christ, to Messiah, to his cross and the saving power of his shed blood, because we are his children. And help us to act like it and not be running after celebrities, whether they're royal celebrities or Hollywood celebrities or whatever. Help us to be true to you, Father, in all things, to be focused on you and your truth and your gospel. And we pray for all these things in the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Amen, V'yimru, Amen. Well, hallelujah. Didn't mean to make it this long, but here we are. And I just give Elohim all the glory. I thank you for listening. Please share this.
Yep,
Especially
exactly
if you have
right,
friends that
Tricky.
you know are Anglophiles, you know, they're really, really into England and the royal family and all of that. And please pray for us. We are really, again, in the thick of spiritual warfare, as you can imagine. Please share this. Please subscribe if you have not already done so. We do pray that you would pray about supporting the work of this ministry. We're going to put up a slide on the screen that will show you we have PayPal, we have text to give, and we also have Zelle. So on our website, you will see down below too. So please support us with your prayers and if possible with your offerings. Thank you. And I pray that you are richly blessed in all that you do throughout the coming week and all through your lives in the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Shalom, shalom.
Okay, guys, we'll do a couple of testimonies and take it up to the 3 hours and then bail out.
Came from the medicine that they were giving me. Please just save my baby. Please just save my baby. Boom, I was out. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors from Germany. My grandfather was a survivor and he was also a liberator. He liberated Dachau, seeking justice for Nazi war crimes. I grew up in a Messianic Jewish home. For me, it was always very important to be Jewish. It was always very important to follow Jesus. I mean, we call him Yeshua when I was growing up. Being a good Jew is you follow the Messiah of Israel and you do what he says you're supposed to do. The thing that's always struck me about Jesus is like how down in the dirt he was in his life. You think about a Messiah who comes and we expect him to be this like big political figure, and he
Okay, Tricky, I'm out in a couple of minutes too, brother. God bless.
He's gonna, defeat our enemies and he's gonna bring peace. And instead what the Messiah does is like get down in the dirt and heal people's broken bodies. He was always concerned like fundamentally with people who had no money and no power.
Good to see you tonight.
And I was always inspired by his example. I was also interested in pursuing justice. I was also interested in going after big bullies as a lawyer, by practicing law on behalf of people who have no money, who have no power, who are in situations where they're being abused. That's what I can do. I went to Thailand and got drawn to an organization that was working on the human trafficking issue. So I was working with these social workers and investigators who were looking into cases of human trafficking. So what I ended up doing for months and months was like sitting in a dark room looking at this like revolting footage of children being sold for sex in brothels to bring some measure of justice to the situation. I was just amazed to find that like this was something that I had a capacity for, and it was something that would get me out of bed in the morning, and it was something that it was something meaningful. When your life is going really well and like you're making lots of money and your career is flying high and you're in a great relationship and everything's good, like you don't need God. What do you need God for? Like, oh, I did all that. Like I'm so smart and special. I did it. That's kind of the attitude that I had developed.
It's good.
I was so excited to be a mom, and I hated being pregnant, and I wanted him out of me.
Yeah, Tricky, I picked up some things from Gary that I didn't know before. It was a really good stream.
Got to the hospital. Everything seemed to be going fine, and I turned over and like started to fall asleep. And the next thing I knew, the room was filling up with nurses. They're coming in and like stabbing me in the thighs and And I'm trying to get my son's heart rate back up because his heart had stopped. And I started shaking from the medicine that they were giving me, and they're taking apart the bed and they're shoving me down the hall. Within like 15 seconds, somebody hit a button on the wall, and I heard on the intercom, code C. What just happened? Looking up at the technician who had this, like, put this mask on my face, and I said, please just save my baby. Please just save my baby. Boom, I was out. And then the next moment I wake up and they're like, congratulations, you're a mom. I see his little hands, you know, reaching out of the little plastic, you know, crib, and I didn't even see his face, and I fell in love with him. And then immediately they start telling me everything that's wrong with him. Someone said the word genetic disorder. And so the next week, recovering from a C-section, separated from my baby, wondering if he was going to be okay, feeling just completely useless. And a nurse came in probably 2 days after he was born, and she was just coming in to like take my temperature and blood pressure, and she's like, how are you? And I just like burst into tears. She said, it's going to be okay. I said, I don't think it's going to be okay. I think something's really wrong with him. And I felt I was at one of the darkest moments of my life. I felt so helpless, and I cried out to God, and I was like, God, what are you doing? Why did this happen to me? Where are you? I just had the feeling of almost like someone putting their hand on my shoulder, just like this comforting, like, I'm here. Like, this sucks and it hurts, and I'm here. I remember going to see him in the NICU, and he's in this little incubator, and he had all these like wires and sensors, and he had an IV in his arm, and he was like tiny and gray and shriveled. He looked like a wrinkly old man, and it was like seeing him breathe, I could see his chest move, and I felt so helpless. Before I had my son, I kind of thought of myself as like a Wonder Woman. Like, oh, there's nothing I can't do, women rock, like everything is just a challenge, an obstacle to be overcome. And when I had my son, I realized, like, I'm not in control. I'm not in control of my body. I'm not in control of what's happening with my child. This is all an illusion that I have control over really like anything. Like fundamentally, like I'm gonna have to depend on God. I literally, like, God gave me this child, and he came out of me, and I like had to give him right back and be like, here you go, keep him alive because I can't. You realize, like, I literally can't even get it from 1 minute to the next without God's help. 5 days later, I got to leave the hospital with him like in my arms and put this tiny little person in the car seat, and, you know, and go home. Thank God everything actually turned out to be okay. Every little issue that my son had, it all cleared up, you know, in the space of that week. I have felt in times of immense sorrow and struggle and suffering, God was there. When people are going through the most horrific trauma in their lives, God is there.
Last one, guys.
Language. I was raised a Zionist. We revolved around Israel. We went to I started going into this dark place. I was like vibrating, and it got darker and darker. I'm never going to come back from this place. My family's the Fiddler on the Roof story, where the pogroms were growing against the Jews, and the Tsar they were attacking villages, and they left with what they could carry. I grew up in what we affectionately called the Borscht Belt. My parents actually spoke Yiddish in the house. It was their secret language. I was raised a Zionist. We revolved around Israel. We went to synagogue on the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I remember the sukkah in our backyard. Some of the fondest memories were going to camp at Habonim. And we'd sing Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. We'd sing Havenu Shalom Aleichem. Growing up in the 60s, I was influenced by what we called the love generation. I was doing LSD, cocaine, psilocybin, mescaline, mephedrine, Nembutal, Seconal, tetrahydrocannabinol, and a few other things. If everybody in the world got stoned, the world would be a better place. Now, that was a lie. We didn't know it at the time. met my wife in 1967. We got initiated into transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And then we joined an ashram. I wore a turban, wrapped it every morning, or all the way. We called it our yoga whites. We had to bring fruit or flowers and lay them at the altar. Later, I found out we were like bringing offerings to a Hindu god. And really what had happened is I had rejected my Judaism. And one day I was meditating, my eyes were closed, and I started going into this kind of like a dark place. And it got darker and darker. And I remember my whole body began to shake. I was like vibrating. I thought for a moment, I'm never going to come back from this place. I've got to get out of here. We sold our cars and our goods and bought backpacks. And my wife and I set out on a quest to find truth. We went to London and we got lost. So some man comes out of the side street, tall guy with a beard. He starts talking to us about Jesus. Jesus isn't for Jews, so he can talk all he wants. He leaves. He comes back about 20 minutes later with a book. And the book is a book called The God Who Is There by a man named Francis Schaeffer. We go down to the Isle of Wight, which is in the English Channel. There's a big rock concert there. It's bigger than Woodstock. And we ended up camping next to two guys. They said, we found the Guru of the West. And I said, well, who's that? And he said, well, his name is Francis Schaeffer. And I said, wait a minute. I went in my backpack and I pulled out this book. And this guy right here, and sure enough, it was the same guy we just heard about 2 weeks before in London. Cool coincidence. You know, everything was groovy back then. And so we ended up hitchhiking Belgium, France, Denmark, Holland. And we go into a bookstore, and the book right in the middle of the religious section said L'Abri, which was the name of the community where Francis Schaeffer lived. And there was a map how to get to L'Abri. We start hitchhiking, and some guy picks us up, and he takes us 2 hours out of his way, all the way, and dropped us off at the front yard of L'Abri. And we ended up staying. They start telling us about Jesus. And like the guy in London, I said, look, Jesus is not for Jews. And we're Jewish. And they said, yeah, but he was a Jew. Another guy was there, great an expert on prophecy. And he starts reading scriptures to us about the prophets prophesying about a Mashiach that would one day come. And they're telling us about the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. If you're Jewish, you probably have a Bible. You have a Tanakh somewhere or a Torah. Open up your Bible. Look at Isaiah 53. Open to Psalm 22. Open to Micah chapter 5. Look it up yourself. Tell me what it says to you. We had a wonderful meal for Thanksgiving, and Dr. Francis Schaeffer is serving what they called communion. I didn't know what communion was. What is this? And he starts talking about Jesus dying on a cross. My eyes are closed. I'm sitting on the floor, and I see this picture of Jesus on a cross. I'm looking straight up, and there he is. He's crucified, and he's bleeding. And when I looked up, a drop of his blood comes down and hits my forehead and splatters on my forehead. I jumped, I flinched, it startled me. Every time I look up, a drop of blood comes down and splatters on my forehead.
Wow, lost in the
my
blood.
forehead began to be covered with blood. And all the discussion and all the debates about theology and anthropology and geology, we talked about the flood and of all kinds of things, it became personal, and I realized that Jesus died for me. The people that came out of Israelites out of Egypt, and God gave them a system of how to come to him, how to approach him. And part of that system was sacrifice. The shedding of blood was necessary for the forgiveness of sin. But when Yeshua came, he was the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. I realized that what he did on